Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we open the pages of one of the most enchanting tales ever told. But before we begin, if these quiet stories bring you peace, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. I'd truly love to know where you're listening from and what hour of the night finds you here. Our little circle now stretches across oceans, bound by stories and calm. So dim the lights, let the air grow still, and let your mind wander gently with me into tonight's story. Thumbelina. There was once a woman who wished very much to have a little child, but she could not obtain her wish. At last, she went to a fairy and said, "I should so very much like to have a little child. Can you tell me where I can find one?" "Oh, that can be easily managed," said the fairy. "Here is a barleycorn of a different kind to those which grow in the farmer's fields and which the chickens eat. Put it into a flower pot and see what will happen." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barleycorn. Then she went home and planted it, and immediately there grew up a large, handsome flower, something like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed as if it were still a bud. "It is a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden-colored leaves, and while she did so, the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. Within the flower, upon the green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Thumbelina, or Tiny, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue violet leaves, with a rose leaf for a counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the woman had placed a plateful of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served Tiny for a boat. Here the little maiden sat and rowed herself from side to side, with 2 oars made of white horsehair. It really was a very pretty sight. Tiny could, also, sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever before been heard. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where Tiny lay sleeping under her rose-leaf quilt. "What a pretty little wife this would make for my son," said the toad, and she took up the walnut shell in which little Tiny lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of a broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was uglier even than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry, "Croak, croak, croak." "Don't speak so loud, or she will wake," said the toad, "and then she might run away, for she is as light as swan's down. We will place her on one of the water lily leaves out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small, and then she cannot escape. And while she is away, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh, in which you are to live when you are married." Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies, with broad green leaves, which seemed to float on the top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared farther off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell, in which little Tiny lay still asleep. The tiny little creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf, and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her room with rushes and wild yellow flowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor little Tiny. She wanted to fetch the pretty bed, that she might put it in the bridal chamber to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, "Here is my son. He will be your husband, and you will live happily in the marsh by the stream." Croak, 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 was all her son could say for himself. So the toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Tiny all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and wept. She could not bear to think of living with the old toad and having her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes, who swam about in the water beneath, had seen the toad and heard what she said, so they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw she was very pretty, and it made them very sorry to think that she must go and live with the ugly toads. No, it must never be. So they assembled together in the water round the green stalk which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and gnawed it away at the root with their teeth. Then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Tiny far away out of reach of land. Tiny sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little creature!" So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther till it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered round her, and at last alighted on the leaf. Tiny pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it round the butterfly, and the other end of the ribbon she fastened to the leaf, which now glided on much faster than ever, taking little Tiny with it as she stood. Presently, a large cockchafer flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened little Tiny felt when the cockchafer flew with her to the tree. But especially was she sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf, for if he could not free himself, he would die of hunger. But the cockchafer did not trouble himself at all about the matter. He seated himself by her side on a large green leaf, gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her she was very pretty, though not in the least like a cockchafer. After a time, all the cockchafers turned up their feelers and said, "She has only 2 legs. How ugly that looks." "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is quite slim." "Pooh, she is like a human being." "Oh, she is ugly," said all the lady cockchafers, although Tiny was very pretty. Then the cockchafer who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly, and would have nothing more to say to her, and told her she might go where she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree and placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockchafers would have nothing to say to her. And all the while she was really the loveliest creature that one could imagine, and as tender and delicate as a beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer, poor little Tiny lived quite alone in the wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass, and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from the rain. She sucked the honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew from their leaves every morning. So passed away the summer and the autumn, and then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly were flown away, and the trees and the flowers had withered. The large clover leaf under the shelter of which she had lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she was herself so frail and delicate that poor little Tiny was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful, falling upon one of us, for we are tall, but she was only an inch high. Then she wrapped herself up in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle and could not keep her warm, and she shivered with cold. Near the wood in which she had been living lay a cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out of the frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood. Oh, how she shivered with the cold! She came at last to the door of a field mouse, who had a little den under the corn stubble. There dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor little Tiny stood before the door just like a little beggar girl, and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse, who was really a good old field mouse, "come into my warm room and dine with me." She was very pleased with Tiny, so she said, "You are quite welcome to stay with me all the winter if you like, but you must keep my rooms clean and neat and tell me stories, for I shall like to hear them very much." And Tiny did all the field mouse asked her, and found herself very comfortable. "We shall have a visitor soon," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor pays me a visit once a week. He is better off than I am. He has large rooms and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for indeed. But he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories." But Tiny did not feel at all interested about this neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came and paid his visit dressed in his black velvet coat. "He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine," said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of the sun and the pretty flowers, because he had never seen them. Tiny was obliged to sing to him, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and many other pretty songs. And the mole fell in love with her, because she had such a sweet voice. But he said nothing yet, for he was very cautious. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own, and here she had permission to walk with Tiny whenever she liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed at the sight of a dead bird which lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird, with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead long, and was lying just where the mole had made his passage. The mole took a piece of phosphorescent wood in his mouth, and it glittered like fire in the dark. Then he went before them to light them through the long, dark passage. When they came to the spot where lay the dead bird, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling. The earth gave way, so that there was a large hole, and the daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow. His beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and his head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Tiny very sad to see it. She did so love the little birds. All the summer they had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs and said, "He will sing no more now. How miserable it must be to be born a little bird. I am thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and always die of hunger in the winter." "Yes, you may well say that, as a clever man," exclaimed the field mouse. "What is the use of his twittering? For when winter comes, he must either starve or be frozen to death. Still, birds are very high-bred." Tiny said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs on the bird, she stooped down and stroked aside the soft feathers which covered the head and kissed the closed eyelids. "Perhaps this was the one who sang to me so sweetly in the summer," she said, "and how much pleasure it gave me, you dear, pretty bird." The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the lady home. But during the night, Tiny could not sleep, so she got out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. Then she carried it to the dead bird and spread it over him, with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird, so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. "Farewell, you pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell. Thank you for your delightful singing during the summer, when all the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast, but she was alarmed immediately, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart. He was not really dead, only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away into warm countries, but if one happens to linger, the cold seizes it. It becomes frozen and falls down as if dead. It remains where it fell, and the cold snow covers it. Tiny trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself. She was only an inch high, but she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it over the head of the poor bird. The next morning she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Tiny, who stood by holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little maiden," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed that I shall soon regain my strength and be able to fly about again in the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "it is cold out of doors now. It snows and freezes. Stay in your warm bed. I will take care of you." Then she brought the swallow some water in a flower leaf, and after he had drank, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush, and could not fly as fast as the others, who were soon far away on their journey to warm countries. Then at last he had fallen to the earth, and could remember no more, nor how he came to be where she had found him. The whole winter the swallow remained underground, and Tiny nursed him with care and love. Neither the mole nor the field mouse knew anything about it, for they did not like swallows. Very soon the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth. Then the swallow bade farewell to Tiny, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit on his back, he said, and he would fly away with her into the green woods. But Tiny knew it would make the field mouse very grieved if she left her in that manner, so she said, "No, I cannot." "Farewell, then, farewell, you good, pretty little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Tiny looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Oh, tweet, tweet," sang the bird as he flew out into the green woods, and Tiny felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn which had been sown in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown up high into the air and formed a thick wood to Tiny, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to be married, Tiny," said the field mouse. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now we will prepare your wedding clothes. They must be both woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you are the mole's wife." Tiny had to turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when the summer would be over. Then he would keep his wedding day with Tiny. But now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it quite hard, like a stone. As soon as the summer was over, the wedding should take place. But Tiny was not at all pleased, for she did not like the tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose, and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear swallow again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Tiny had her outfit quite ready, and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks the wedding must take place." Then Tiny wept and said she would not marry the disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchen and cellars are quite full. You ought to be very thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to fetch Tiny away to live with him, deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun, because he did not like it. The poor child was very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun, and as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look at it once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arm towards it. And then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut, and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm round a little red flower that grew just by her side. "Greet the little swallow from me, if you should see him again." "Tweet, tweet," sounded over her head suddenly. She looked up, and there was the swallow himself flying close by. As soon as he spied Tiny, he was delighted. And then she told him how unwilling she felt to marry the ugly mole, and to live always beneath the earth, and never to see the bright sun any more. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter is coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away into warmer countries. Will you go with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself on with your sash. Then we can fly away from the ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains into warmer countries where the sun shines more brightly. than here, where it is always summer and the flowers bloom in greater beauty. Fly now with me, dear little Tiny. You saved my life when I lay frozen in that dark passage." "Yes, I will go with you," said Tiny, and she seated herself on the bird's back, with her feet on his outstretched wings, and tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow rose in the air and flew over forest and over sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with eternal snow. Tiny would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered, so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length they reached the warm countries, where the sun shines brightly, and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here, on the hedges and by the wayside, grew purple, green, and white grapes. Lemons and oranges hung from trees in the woods, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in the olden times. Vines clustered round its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow, who carried Tiny. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," she said, and clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had been broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Tiny and placed her on one of the broad leaves. But how surprised she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his shoulders, and was not much larger than Tiny herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwell in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Tiny to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant, compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Tiny, he was delighted, and thought her the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head and placed it on hers, and asked her name, and if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband to the son of a toad, or the mole, with my black velvet and fur, so she said, "Yes," to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, all so pretty it was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Tiny a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which had belonged to a large white fly, and they fastened them to Tiny's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart he felt sad, for he was very fond of Tiny, and would have liked never to part from her again. "You must not be called Tiny any more," said the spirit of the flowers to her. "It is an ugly name, and you are so very pretty. We will call you Maya." "Farewell, farewell," said the swallow, with a heavy heart as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which dwelt the writer of fairy tales. The swallow sang, "Tweet, tweet," and from his song came the whole story. The Teapot. Once upon a time, there stood on a polished oak table a most elegant teapot, made of the finest porcelain, white as snow, and shining faintly in the lamplight. It was proud, very proud indeed. Proud of its graceful, long spout that curved like a swan's neck, proud of its strong handle that balanced the weight of hot tea so gracefully. Proud, in short, of being a teapot, and not a common vessel of clay. It often admired itself in the reflection of the silver tray, and sighed with satisfaction. "How fine I look," it said to itself. "The cups may have handles, the sugar bowl may wear a lid, and the cream pitcher may shine with polish, but none can boast what I have. A noble spout and a grand handle, one before and one behind. That gives me character, that gives me distinction." Yet there was one thing the teapot did not speak of, its lid. The poor lid had a long crack running across it, and several small rivets held it together, showing that it had once been broken. That was not a subject for polite conversation. "We do not talk about our flaws," thought the teapot. "Other people will kindly do that for us." Indeed, the rest of the tea service, the cups, the sugar bowl, and the little cream pitcher, did exactly that. They whispered about the cracked lid whenever the teapot wasn't listening, though it always somehow knew. "Ah, yes," sighed the teapot. "They talk about me because they envy me. That's always how it is with the distinguished. Still, I am humble. I acknowledge my imperfections, and that knowledge is my virtue. I may be flawed, but within me flows the blessing of tea itself. Inside me, the leaves from faraway China unfold and breathe their fragrance into the boiling water. Through my spout, I pour out warmth and comfort to the world. Surely that makes me the queen of the table." And so it lived, filled with self-contentment, loved by the lady of the house who lifted it every afternoon with a delicate hand. But one day, that delicate hand trembled. Perhaps she was distracted, or perhaps fate wished to humble the proud. The teapot slipped from her grasp. Down it fell. There was a loud crash, and tragedy followed. The spout snapped clean off. The handle broke into two. The lid, poor lid, was shattered beyond repair. The boiling tea spilled across the carpet, and the teapot lay helpless, fainting from the shock, while the rest of the tea service rattled and tittered in thin, cruel laughter. "It's not the hand's fault," they whispered. "It's the teapot's vanity. It was bound to end this way." The teapot heard them. It would never forget. Later, as it lay discarded and empty, it murmured to itself, "That moment was my fall, my great downfall. They mocked me for being broken. They called me useless, an invalid. The next day I was taken away, handed to a poor woman who begged for food at the door. From queen of the tea table, I had become an object of pity. That is how swiftly pride turns to dust." The woman placed the teapot in her small cottage, where the wind crept through the cracks and the light was dim. There, on a shelf beside chipped plates, the teapot stood in silence. "So this is my end," it thought. "No more tea, no more compliments, no more silver trays or gentle hands." But the story did not end there. For in the stillness of that humble home, something unexpected happened. The woman, who loved flowers though she had few, filled the broken teapot with earth. To her it was not a useless thing, but a pot ready to cradle life. She pressed into the soil a small bulb, dry, brown, and sleeping. I don't know who placed it there, the teapot later said, but it was as if a new soul had been given to me. They buried something in me, yes, but what they buried was a promise. Through the long days of winter, the teapot stood on the windowsill, half forgotten, watching frost bloom on the glass. Deep inside, the bulb awoke. It sent out tender roots, exploring the dark soil. Soon a green shoot pushed upward, a pulse, a heartbeat. "Something is alive in me," whispered the teapot. "I feel it. Life, growing where once there was only tea and pride." As the days grew warmer, the shoot became a stalk, and the stalk unfolded into a flower. Its petals opened like rays of sunlight, glowing with color and fragrance. The teapot felt joy. Not the old vain joy of admiration, but a gentler, purer kind. I gave it shelter, it thought. I gave it warmth. I bore it within me, and now it blooms. I see beauty, and I forget myself in it. Ah, what a blessing it is to lose oneself in another's life. The flower did not thank the teapot. Flowers rarely do. The people who came to visit admired the blossom, not the pot that held it. They said, "What a lovely flower! It deserves a finer vase." And the teapot, hearing that, smiled sadly. "I am content," it said softly. "Let it have its better home. My task is done." So they broke the old teapot in two and placed the flower in a new pot of shining glass. The shards of porcelain were thrown into the yard, where the rain washed them clean and the sun made them glimmer faintly among the weeds. And there the teapot lies to this day, only a fragment, but with memory intact. It remembers the fragrance of the tea, the laughter of the cups, the pain of the fall, and above all, the joy of the flower that bloomed within it. I am no longer whole, it thinks, but I have lived. I have poured warmth, endured breaking, and carried life. And memory is the treasure that can never be shattered. Luck may lie in a pin. Let me tell you a story about something everyone believes in, but few can explain. About luck. Some call it fortune, others destiny, others God's smile. Whatever name we give it, we all know what it feels like when it comes. That mysterious turning of the wind that makes things go right. Some people live their whole lives under its steady sun. Others catch only a single glimmer of it in their youth or in an hour of need. And then there are those who wait and wait, thinking luck has forgotten them, until suddenly, when they least expect it, it arrives, quiet as a bird landing on a windowsill. For one way or another, luck visits us all. Now everyone knows that it is God who places each child upon its mother's lap. Sometimes that lap belongs to a lady in a great house, surrounded by velvet curtains and chandeliers. Sometimes it belongs to a mother who sings while she works at her spinning wheel in a humble cottage. And sometimes the cradle is nothing more than a fold in a traveler's cloak laid upon the grass, beneath the open sky where the wind hums its own lullaby. But wherever the child is placed, one thing never changes. Before God leaves, he slips a little gift into the world, a lucky piece. He doesn't leave it in the baby's hand. Oh no. He hides it somewhere in the wide world, in a place no one would think to look. It might be buried deep in a mountain, or resting quietly at the bottom of a river, or hanging, unseen, among the leaves of a tree that has never borne fruit. And he whispers, though few hear it, "When the time is right, this shall be found." You see, every person's lucky piece waits for them, patient as the dawn. It may take years or half a lifetime, but it always appears. That is a comforting thought, isn't it? Sometimes the lucky piece takes the form of something simple, like an apple. That was the case for a man named Newton. The apple dropped into his lap, and with it fell the idea that changed the world. If you haven't heard that story, you must ask someone to tell it to you someday. But tonight I shall tell you another. Not about an apple, but a pear. There once lived a man who was poor when he was born, poor when he grew up, and poor still when he took a wife. His trade was turning wood. He made handles for umbrellas and little rings to fasten them. His hands were clever, his heart was kind, but his work brought him little more than bread for the day. "I shall never find my luck," he used to say, half sighing, half smiling, as he turned the lathe and watched the shavings curl like ribbons to the floor. Yet this story is true as gospel, and I could tell you the very name of his town if it mattered. Around his small house grew wild serviceberry bushes, their fruit red and sour. But to him they were beautiful, a poor man's jewels. In his garden stood one pear tree, old and stubborn, that had never in its life borne fruit. But in that very tree his fortune was waiting, hidden in the wood itself. One night a storm swept over the land. The wind howled down the chimneys and tore tiles from the roofs. They said in the next town that the great mail coach had been lifted clean off the road, tossed like a toy. In the morning, the poor turner found that one of the largest branches of his pear tree had been wrenched away and lay across the garden. He dragged it into his workshop and, just for fun, decided to make something from it. A handful of wooden pears, some big, some small, some in between. "Well," he laughed, "for once my tree has borne fruit." And he gave them to his children to play with. Now, in the land where they lived, it rained often, and umbrellas were among the necessities of life. But the turner's family owned only one, and that one was always breaking. When the wind blew hard, it turned inside out like a great black flower. Sometimes the ribs snapped, sometimes the fabric tore. Still, the turner could mend almost anything. What troubled him most was the little button and loop that kept the umbrella neatly closed. The button would always fly off and vanish the moment they thought the umbrella was safely tied. One rainy afternoon it popped off again, and the turner searched everywhere. Between the cracks of the floor, he found one of the smallest pears his children had dropped. He rolled it in his fingers and said, "If I can't find the button, this will have to do." He drilled a hole through it, fastened a string, and tied it to the umbrella. And it worked better than any button he'd ever seen. The pear held fast, smooth and strong, even when the wind tugged and pulled. Some time later, when he sent his usual bundle of umbrella handles and rings to the city, he tucked in a few of those tiny wooden pears as well. The merchant, amused, tried them on a handful of new umbrellas. Those umbrellas, among hundreds of others, were loaded onto a ship bound for America, that faraway land of new ideas and quick eyes. Now, Americans have a fine gift for noticing what works. They saw at once that the little pears held better than any button before them. The merchant wrote back across the ocean, From now on, send all umbrellas fastened with small wooden pears. And so, the turner had work. Real work. Thousands of pears had to be made for umbrellas that would cross the sea. Day and night his lathe hummed. His wife helped him polish the pears. His children packed them into boxes, and the money began to pour in, first in pennies, then in silver, then in shining gold. The whole pear tree, branch by branch, vanished into little round pieces of good fortune. When the last scrap of it was gone, the poor man was poor no longer. He built a great workshop with tall windows and hired other turners to help him. There was laughter in the house now, and bread enough for everyone, and even a little music at night. When people asked him what had changed his fate, he would smile and say, "My luck was in the pear tree all along." And sometimes, when he was in a joking mood, he'd add, "You never know. Good luck may lie in a pin, and so say I, the teller of this tale. For in Denmark we have a saying that if you put a white pin in your mouth, you become invisible. But it must be a true lucky piece, one that comes from God's own hand. I have such a pin, and whenever I travel to America, that new world across the wide rolling sea, though so far it always feels near to me, I carry that pin with me. Already my stories have crossed the ocean before I have. The wind carries them westward, the waves bear them like messengers. And perhaps, as you read this, I am already there in spirit, standing beside your fireside, hearing your laughter, seeing the light in your children's eyes. That light, that golden glimmer in a child's gaze, is the richest gold of all, the kind that rings like joy and never tarnishes. And so I end as I began. Luck comes to us all, perhaps in an apple or in a pear, or even in something as small and simple as a white pin. For truly, luck may lie in a pin. The most incredible thing. In a distant kingdom where imagination was cherished almost as much as gold, the king made a peculiar decree. He announced that whoever could perform the most incredible thing would win the hand of his only daughter, and with her, half of his vast and glittering realm. It was an invitation to glory, madness, and mischief all at once, and it set every heart in motion. Young men and old men, scholars and fools, all began to plot and to dream. Each believed that his own idea would astonish the world. One man starved himself into a living skeleton to prove endurance. Another ate until he burst, claiming to show the limits of appetite. A third drank so deeply that he never rose again. Even the street boys caught the fever, practicing ridiculous tricks, trying to spit over their own shoulders and catch it again, believing such foolishness to be the most incredible thing. At last, the day of exhibition arrived. The entire city gathered in the King's Square, where a grand hall had been built for the occasion. Banners fluttered, trumpets sounded, and a panel of judges was appointed, ranging from 3-year-olds with round, astonished eyes to gray-haired elders who had long ceased to be amazed by anything. One by one, contestants presented their wonders, painted illusions, impossible machines, strange musical instruments, and spectacles of fire and mirrors. Yet when all had been shown, the crowd's murmur became a hush. For before them stood a great hall clock unlike any clock ever seen. Its maker, a modest young craftsman, had spent years at his bench shaping it with care and reverence. On the outside, it gleamed like gold, carved with vines, angels, and scenes of time's eternal dance. But it was the inside, the living heart of it, that drew every gaze. When the clock struck, its doors opened, and out came little moving figures, alive with motion and song. Each hour revealed a different world, a miniature play of history and faith. When it struck one, Moses appeared upon the mountain, chiseling the first great commandment into stone. There is but one true God. At 2, Adam and Eve came forth in the innocence of Eden, unashamed and free beneath the flowering trees. At 3, the 3 wise men arrived from distant lands, their robes dusted with sand, their hands bearing gifts of myrrh and gold. When 4 sounded, the seasons walked out in solemn grace, spring with a branch of green beech and a cuckoo perched upon it, summer with a grasshopper on a sheaf of wheat, autumn carrying an empty stork's nest, for the birds had flown, and winter with his tame crow, croaking old tales by a stove. At 5, the 5 senses paraded by. Sight was a man making spectacles, hearing, a noisy coppersmith, smell, a flower girl with violets in her hair, taste, a cheerful cook, and feeling, a veiled mourner trailing sorrow to the floor. When 6 struck, a gambler threw dice, 6s, of course, the highest caste of all. At 7 came the 7 days of the week, or were they the 7 deadly sins? No one could tell, for they wore masks that looked alike. At 8, monks appeared and chanted the evening hymn, filling the air with peace. At 9, the 9 muses danced in a circle, astronomy and history, poetry and song, all whispering secrets to the stars. 10 o'clock brought Moses again, this time bearing all 10 commandments, shining with divine light. At 11, children danced from the doors and sang, all the way to heaven. The clock struck 11. And then came 12, the solemn hour of night. Out marched the watchman with his spiked morning star, his lantern and his hymn. 'Twas at the midnight hour our Savior he was born. As he sang, roses blossomed around him and unfolded into angelic faces with wings tinted like rainbows. The crowd trembled, some with awe, others with tears. Never had mortal eyes seen such craftsmanship, such wonder, such beauty. It was indeed, all agreed, the most incredible thing. The king smiled, the judges nodded, and the princess herself, though she said nothing, looked softly toward the humble craftsman who had created it. He was young, earnest, and kind, known to all as a dutiful son and a true friend. He had never sought glory, only to make something beautiful. Surely he was the one most worthy of her hand and of half the kingdom. So the day of judgment came. The princess sat upon a throne freshly stuffed with horsehair, which pricked and rustled beneath her. The hall glittered with silk and gold. The young craftsman stood before the court, radiant with quiet pride, as the crowd whispered blessings for him. Then, from the back of the hall, a rough voice thundered, "Hold your trumpets! You have not yet seen the most incredible thing." A tall, bony man strode forward, eyes burning, an axe in his hand. Before anyone could move, he swung the blade. One blow, then another, and the magnificent clock shattered into ruin. Wheels rolled, gears flew, springs snapped and scattered like frightened birds. "There!" he shouted triumphantly. "I have done it. I have performed the most incredible thing, destroying what no other dared to destroy." The hall was stunned, but the judges, bound by the king's decree, looked at one another and murmured, "Indeed, to destroy such a masterpiece, is that not in its way the most incredible thing?" The crowd, easily swayed, echoed the judgment, and so the law was upheld. The man of destruction was declared the victor. Trumpets blared. The princess, pale and silent, was given to him. The wedding bells rang, though none rang gladly. By candlelight the church gleamed. The courtiers sang solemn hymns as the bride and groom walked down the aisle. The destroyer swaggered proudly, as if he had conquered the world. Then, silence. The candles flickered. A cold wind crept through the church. Suddenly, crash, the great doors burst open. Down the aisle rolled the broken gears, the bent rods, the scattered pieces of the ruined clock. They gathered together, moving as if alive, and reformed before the astonished eyes of all. A miracle, or justice, had come to life. For though a work of art can be broken, the spirit of art never dies. The clock stood whole, again luminous and breathing. It struck once, then twice, until it had spoken all 12 hours in a single rising chorus. Moses appeared, his face blazing, and hurled the stone tablets before the false bridegroom's feet. "You have broken my arms," he said, "and with them the law itself. Stand where you are." Adam and Eve came forth, pale and sorrowful. The wise men followed, shaking their heads. The seasons drifted in like ghosts of time. Each figure spoke, "Shame upon you, breaker of beauty." But shame touched him not. Finally, the night watchman returned, his star shining like judgment. He raised it high and struck the destroyer upon the brow. "A blow for a blow," he said, "justice for art and for its maker." The man fell dead where he stood. The figures vanished, the gears faded like mist. Yet the church was filled with light. The candles flamed like lilies of fire. The gilded stars above cast down golden beams, and the organ played though no hands touched the keys. The people fell to their knees, crying, "We have seen the most incredible thing." Then the princess rose and spoke. "Summon the true master, the craftsman who made this wonder. Let him stand beside me. He shall be my husband and my lord." And so it was. The young man came forward, humble yet shining with quiet grace. The people rejoiced and blessed him, for none envied him. For the kingdom had learned that creation is greater than destruction, and that the spirit of art, pure, gentle, and eternal, can never be slain. And that, indeed, was the most incredible thing of all. The Ice Maiden. Let us visit Switzerland. Let us take a look at that magnificent land of mountains, where the forests creep up the sides of the steep, rocky walls. Let us climb to the dazzling snow fields above, and descend again to the green valleys below, where the rivers and streams rush along as if afraid they will be too late to reach the ocean and disappear. The burning rays of the sun shine in the deep dales and also on the heavy masses of snow above, so that the ice blocks which have been piling for years melt and turn to thundering avalanches or heaped-up glaciers. 2 such glaciers lie in the broad ravines under the Schreckhorn and the Wetterhorn, near the little mountain town of Grindelwald. They are strange to look at, and for that reason, in summertime, many travelers come here from all parts of the world. They cross the lofty, snow-capped hills, and they come through the deep valleys. Then they have to climb for several hours, and as they ascend, the valleys seem to become deeper and deeper, until they look as if they are being viewed from a balloon. Often the clouds hang around the towering peaks like thick curtains of smoke. while down in the valley dotted with brown wooden houses, a ray of the sun may be shining brightly, throwing into sharp relief a brilliant patch of green, until it seems transparent. The water foams and roars and rushes along below, but up above the water murmurs and tinkles. It looks as if silver ribbons were streaming down over the rocks. On both sides of the ascending road are wooden houses. Each house has its little potato garden, and this is a real necessity, for within those doors are many hungry mouths. There are many children, and children are often wasteful with food. From all the cottages they swarm out and besiege travelers, whether these be on foot or in carriages. All the children are little merchants. They offer for sale charming toy wooden houses, replicas of those that are built here in the mountains. Some 20 years ago, there often stood here, but always somewhat apart from the other children, a little boy who was also eager to do some business. He would stand there with an earnest, grave expression, holding his chip box tightly with both hands, as if afraid of losing it. But it was this seriousness, and the fact that he was so small, that caused him to be noticed and called forward, so that he often sold more than all the others. He didn't exactly know why himself. His grandfather lived high up on the mountain, where he carved out the neat, pretty little houses. In a room up there, he had an old chest full of all sorts of carved things: nutcrackers, knives, forks, boxes with cleverly carved scrollwork, and leaping chamois. Everything that would please a child's eye. But little Rudy, as he was called, gazed with greater interest and longing at the old gun that hung under the beams of the roof. "He shall have it some day," his grandfather had said, "but not until he's big and strong enough to use it." Small as the boy was, he took care of the goats. If knowing how to climb along with the goats meant that he was a good goat herd, then Rudy certainly was an excellent goat herd. He could even go higher than the goats, for he loved to search for birds' nests high up in the tops of the trees. He was bold and daring. No one ever saw him smile, except when he stood near the roaring waterfall or heard the rolling of an avalanche. He never played with the other children. In fact, he never went near them, except when his grandfather sent him down to sell the things he had carved. And Rudy didn't care much for that. He would much rather climb about in the mountains or sit home with his grandfather and hear him tell stories of ancient times and of the people at nearby Meiringen, where he was born. This race, he said, had not always lived there. They were wanderers from other lands. They had come from the far north, where their people still lived and were called Swedes. This was a good deal for Rudy to learn, but he learned still more from other teachers, the animals that lived in the house. There was a big dog, a Jola, which had belonged to Rudy's father, and there was a tomcat. Rudy had much to thank the tomcat for. The cat had taught him to climb. "Come on out on the roof with me," the cat had said one day, very distinctly and intelligibly, too, for to a little child who can hardly speak, the language of hens and ducks, cats and dogs, is almost as easily understood as that of fathers and mothers. But you must be very young indeed then. Those are the days when Grandpa's stick neighs and turns into a horse, with head, legs, and tail. Some children keep these thoughts longer than others, and people say that these are exceedingly backward and remain children too long. But people say so much. "Come on out on the roof with me, little Rudy," was one of the first things the cat said, and Rudy could understand him. It's all imagination to think you'll fall. You won't fall unless you're afraid. Come on, put one of your paws here and another there, and then feel your way with your forepaws. Use your eyes and be very active in your limbs. If there's a hole, jump over it the way I do." And that's what little Rudy did. Very often he sat on the sloping roof of the house with the cat, and often in the tops of the trees, and even high up among the towering rocks, where the cat never went. "Higher, higher," the trees and bushes said. "Can't you see how we climb, how high we go, and how tightly we hold on, even on the narrowest ledge of rock?" And often Rudy reached the top of the hill even before the sun. There he took his morning draught of fresh, strengthening mountain air, that drink which only our Lord can prepare, and which human beings call the early fragrance from the mountain herbs and the wild thyme and mint in the valley. Everything that is heavy in the air is absorbed by the overhanging clouds and carried by the winds over the pine woods, while the essence of fragrance becomes light and fresh air. And this was Rudy's morning draught. Sunbeams, daughters of the sun who bring his blessings with them, kissed his cheeks. Dizziness stood nearby, watching, but dared not approach him. The swallows from his grandfather's house below, there were at least 7 nests, flew up toward him, and the goats, singing, "We and you, and you and we." They brought greetings from his home, even from the 2 hens, who were the only birds in the house. However, Rudy had never been very intimate with them. Young as he was, he had traveled, and quite a good deal for such a little fellow. He was born in Canton Valais, and brought from there over the hills. He had recently traveled on foot to the nearby Staubach, that seems to flutter like a silver veil before the snow-clad, glittering white Jungfrau, and he had been to the great glaciers near Grindelwald. But there was a sad story connected with that trip. His mother had met her death there, and it was there, as his grandfather used to say, that little Rudy had lost all his childish happiness. When he was less than a year old, he laughed more than he cried, as his mother had written. But from the time he fell into the crevasse, his whole nature had changed. His grandfather didn't talk about this very much, but it was known all over the mountain. Rudy's father had been a coach driver, and the big dog that now shared the boy's home had always gone with him on his journeys over the Simplon down to Lake Geneva. Rudy's relatives on his father's side lived in the Rhone Valley, in Canton Valais, where his uncle was a celebrated chamois hunter and a famous alpine guide. Rudy was only a year old when he lost his father, and his mother decided to return with the child to her own family in the Berner Oberland. Her father lived a few hours' journey from Grindelwald. He was a woodcarver, and his trade enabled him to live comfortably. With her infant in her arms, she set out toward home in June, accompanied by 2 chamois hunters, over the Gemmi toward Grindelwald. They had made the greater part of the journey, had climbed the highest ridges to the snowfields, and could already see her native valley with the familiar scattered cottages. They now had only to cross the upper part of one great glacier. The newly fallen snow concealed a crevasse, not deep enough to reach the abyss below, where the water rushed along, but deeper than a man's height. As she was carrying her child, the young woman suddenly slipped, sank down, and instantly disappeared. Not a shriek or groan was heard, only the wailing of a little child. It was over an hour before her 2 companions could obtain ropes and poles from the nearest house to pull her out. And after tremendous labor, They brought from the crevasse what they thought were 2 dead bodies. Every means of restoring life was tried, and at last they managed to save the child, but not the mother. Thus the old grandfather received in his house not a daughter, but a daughter's son, the little one who laughed more than he cried. But a change seemed to have come over him since his terrible experience in the glacier crevasse, that cold, strange ice world where the Swiss peasant believes the souls of the damned are imprisoned till doomsday. The glacier lies like a rushing stream, frozen and pressed into blocks of green crystal, one huge mass of ice balanced on another. The swelling stream of ice and snow tears along in the depths beneath, while within it yawn deep hollows, immense crevasses. It is a wondrous palace of crystal, and in it dwells the Ice Maiden, queen of the glaciers. She, the slayer, the crusher, is half the mighty ruler of the rivers, half a child of the air. Thus it is that she can soar to the loftiest haunts of the chamois, to the towering summits of the snow-covered hills, where the boldest mountaineer has to cut footrests for himself in the ice. She sails on a light pine twig over the foaming river below, and leaps lightly from one rock to another, with her long, snow-white hair fluttering about her, and her blue-green robe glistening like the water in the deep Swiss lakes. To crush, to hold fast, that is my power, she says. And yet a beautiful boy was snatched from me, one whom I had kissed, but not yet kissed to death. He is again among human beings. He tends his goats on the mountain peaks. He is always climbing higher and still higher, far, far from other humans, but never from me. He is mine. I will fetch him. So she commanded Dizziness to undertake the mission. It was in the summertime, and too hot for the Ice Maiden in the valley where the green mint grew, so Dizziness mounted and dived. Now Dizziness has a flock of sisters. First one came, then 3 of them, and the Ice Maiden selected the strongest of those who wield their power indoors and out. They perch on the banisters of steep staircases and the guardrails of lofty towers. They run like squirrels along the mountain ridges and, leaping away from them, tread the air as a swimmer treads water, luring a victim onward to the abyss beneath. Dizziness and the Ice Maiden both reach out for mankind, as the polypus reaches after whatever comes near it. The mission of Dizziness was to seize Rudy. "Seize him, you say," said Dizziness. "I can't do it. That wretched cat has taught him its skill. That human child has a power within himself that keeps me away. I can't touch the little fellow when he hangs from branches out over the abyss, or I'd be glad to tickle his feet and send him flying down through the air. I can't do it." "We can seize him," said the Ice Maiden. "Either you or I. I will. I will." "No, no." A whisper, a song, broke upon the air like the echo of church bells pealing. It was the harmonious tones of a chorus of other spirits of nature, the mild, soft, and loving daughters of the rays of the sun. Every evening they encircle the mountain peaks and spread their rosy wings, which, as the sun sinks, become redder and redder until the lofty Alps seem blazing. Mountaineers call this the alpine glow. When the sun has set, they retire into the white snow on the peaks and sleep there until they appear again at sunrise. Greatly do they love flowers and butterflies and mankind, and they had taken a great fancy to little Rudy. "You shall not catch him, you shall not have him," they sang. "I have caught greater and stronger ones than he," said the Ice Maiden. Then the daughters of the sun sang of the traveler whose cap was torn from his head by the whirlwind and carried away in stormy flight. The wind had power to take his cap, but not the man himself. You can seize him, but you cannot hold him, you children of strength. The human race is stronger and more divine, even than we are. They alone can mount higher than our mother, the sun. They know the magic words that can compel the wind and waves to obey and serve them. Once the heavy, dragging weight of the body is loosened, it soars upward. So thus sounded the glorious bell-like chorus. And every morning the sun's rays shone on the sleeping child through the one tiny window of the old man's house. The daughters of the sun kissed the boy. They tried to thaw, to wipe out the ice kiss given him by the queen of the glaciers, when in his dead mother's arms he lay in the deep ice crevasse from which he had only been rescued as if by a miracle. The journey to the new home. Now Rudy was 8 years old. His uncle, who lived in the Rhone Valley on the other side of the mountain, wanted to take the boy so that he could have a better education and be taught to take care of himself. The grandfather thought this would be better for the boy, so agreed to part with him. As the time for Rudy's departure drew near, there were many others besides grandfather to take leave of. First, there was Ajola, the old dog. "Your father was the coachman, and I was the coachman's dog," said Ajola. "We often traveled back and forth, and I know both dogs and men on the other side of the mountains. I never had the habit of speaking very much, but now that we have so little time to talk to each other, I'll say a little more than I usually do, and tell you a story that I've been thinking about for a long time. I can't understand it, and you can't either, but that doesn't matter. I have learned this. The good things of this world aren't dealt out equally either to dogs or to men. Not everyone is born to lie in someone's lap or to drink milk. I've never been accustomed to such luxury, but I've often seen a puppy dog traveling inside a post-carriage, taking up a human being's seat, while the lady to whom he belonged, or rather who belonged to him, carried a bottle of milk from which she fed him. She also offered him sweet candy, but he wouldn't bother to eat it. He just sniffed at it, so she ate it herself. I was running in the mud beside the carriage, about as hungry as a dog could be, but I had only my own bitter thoughts to chew on. Things weren't quite as they ought to be, but then there is much that is not. I hope you get to ride inside carriages and ride softly, but you can't make all that happen by yourself. I never could either by barking or yawning. That was Ajola's lecture, and Rudy threw his arms around the dog's neck and kissed his wet nose. Then he took the cat in his arms, but he struggled to be free and cried, "You're getting much too strong for me, but I won't use my claws against you. Climb away over the mountains. I've taught you how to climb. Never think about falling, but hold tightly. Don't be afraid, and you'll be safe enough." Then the cat ran off, for he didn't want Rudy to see how sorry he was. The hens were hopping about the floor. One of them had lost its tail, for a traveler who thought himself a sportsman had shot it off, mistaking the poor hen for a game bird. "Rudy is going over the mountains," said one of the hens. "He's in a hurry," said the other, "and I don't like farewells." So they both hopped away, and the goats also said their farewells. "May, May," they bleated. It sounded so sad. Just at that time, there happened to be two experienced guides about to cross the mountains. They planned to descend the other side of the Gemmi, and Rudy would go with them on foot. It was a hard trip for such a little fellow, but he had considerable strength and was untiring and courageous. The swallows accompanied him a little way and sang to him, "We and you, and you and we." The traveler's route led across the foaming Lucina, which falls in many small rivulets from the dark clefts of the Grindelwald glaciers. Fallen tree trunks made bridges, and pieces of rock served here as stepping stones. Soon they had passed the alder thicket and began to climb the mountain near where the glaciers had loosened themselves from the cliff. They went around the glacier and over the blocks of ice. Rudy crept and walked. His eyes sparkled with joy as he firmly placed his iron-tipped mountain shoes. It seemed as if he wished to leave behind him an impression of each footstep. The patches of black earth tossed onto the glacier by the mountain torrents gave it a burned look, but still the blue-green glassy ice shone through. They had to circle the little pools that seemed dammed up by detached masses of ice. On this route, they approached a huge stone, which was balanced on the edge of an ice crevasse. Suddenly, the rock lost its balance and toppled into the crevasse. The echo of its thunderous fall resounded faintly from the deep abyss of the glacier, far, far below. Upward, always upward, they climbed. The glacier stretched up like a solid stream of masses of ice piled in wild confusion, wedged between bare and rugged rocks. For a moment, Rudy remembered what had been told him, how he had lain in his mother's arms, buried in one of these terrible crevasses. But he soon threw off such gloomy thoughts and considered the tale as only one of the many stories he had heard. Occasionally, when the guides thought the way was too difficult for such a little boy, they held out their hands to help him, but he didn't tire, and he crossed the glacier as sure-footedly as a chamois itself. From time to time, they reached rocky ground. They walked between mossless stones, and sometimes between low pine trees or out on the green pastures, always changing, always new. About them towered the lofty, snow-capped peaks, which every child in the country knows by name: the Jungfrau, the Eiger, and the Monk. Rudy had never before been up so high, had never before walked on the wide ocean of snow with its frozen billows of ice, from which the wind occasionally swept little clouds of powdery snow as it sweeps the whitecaps from the waves of the sea. Glacier stretched beside glacier, almost as if they were holding hands, and each is a crystal palace of the Ice Maiden, whose joy and in whose power it is to seize and imprison her victims. The sun shone warmly, and the snow dazzled the eye as if it were covered with the flashing sparks of pale blue diamonds. Countless insects, especially butterflies and bees, lay dead in heaps on the snow. They had winged their way too high, or perhaps the wind had carried them up to the cold regions that to them meant death. Around the Wetterhorn there hung a threatening cloud, like a large mass of very fine dark wool. It sank, bulging with what was concealed within. A fawn, the alpine south wind that foretells a storm, fearfully violent in its power when it should break loose. This whole journey, the stops for the nights high up in the mountains, the wild route, the deep crevasses where the water, during countless ages of time, had cut through the solid stone, made an unforgettable impression on little Rudy's mind. A deserted stone hut beyond the snowfields gave them shelter and comfort for the night. Here they found charcoal and pine branches, and a fire was soon kindled. Sleeping quarters were arranged as well as possible, and the men settled near the blazing fire. They smoked their tobacco and drank some of the warm, spiced beverage they had prepared, and they didn't forget to give Rudy some. The talk turned to the mysterious creatures who haunt the high Alps, the huge, strange snakes in the deep lakes, the night riders, the spectral host that carry sleepers through the air to the wonderful, floating city of Venice, the wild herdsman who drives his black sheep over the green pastures. These had never been seen, although men had heard the sound of their bells and the frightful noise of the phantom herd. Rudy listened to these superstitious tales with intense interest, but with no fear, for that he had never known. Yet while he listened, he imagined he could hear the roar of that wild, spectral herd. Yes, it became more and more distinct, until the men heard it too. They stopped their talking and listened to it, and then they told Rudy that he must not fall asleep. It was a faun that had risen, that violent tempest which whirls down from the mountains into the valley below, and in its fury snaps large trees like reeds and tosses the wooden houses from one bank of a river to the other as easily as we would move chessmen. After an hour, they told Rudy the wind had died down and he might go to sleep safely. And weary from his long walk, he followed their instructions and slept. Early next morning, they set off again. That day the sun shone for Rudy on new mountains, new glaciers, and new snowfields. They had entered Canton Valais, on the other side of the ridge of mountains visible from Grindelwald. But they still had a long way to go to his new home. More mountain clefts, pastures, woods, and new paths unfolded themselves. Then Rudy saw other houses and other people. But what kind of human beings were these? They were misshapen, with frightful, disgusting, fat, yellowish faces, the hideous flesh of their necks hanging down like bags. They were the Cretans, miserable, diseased wretches who dragged themselves along and stared with stupid, dead eyes at the strangers who crossed their path. The women were even more disgusting than the men. Were these the sort of people who lived in his new home? The uncle. When Rudy arrived in his uncle's house, he thanked God to see people such as he was accustomed to. There was only one Cretan, a poor imbecile boy, one of those unfortunate beings who, in their poverty, which amounts to utter destitution, always travel about in Canton Valais, visiting different families in turn and staying a month or two in each house. Poor Sapperlee happened to be living in the house of Rudy's uncle when the boy arrived. This uncle was a bold hunter and a cooper by trade, while his wife was a lively little person, with a face somewhat like a bird's, eyes like an eagle's, and a long, skinny, fuzz-covered neck. Everything was strange and new to Rudy. Dress, customs, employment, even the language, though his young ear would soon learn to understand that. A comparison between his grandfather's little home and his uncle's domicile greatly favored the latter. The room they lived in was larger. The walls were decorated with chamois heads and brightly polished guns. A painting of the Virgin Mary hung over the door, with fresh alpine roses and a constantly burning lamp before it. As you have learned, his uncle was one of the most famous chamois hunters of the canton, and also the most experienced and best guide. Rudy became the pet of the house, but there was another pet too, a blind, lazy old dog, of not much use anymore. But he had been useful once, and his value in former years was remembered, so he now lived as one of the family, with every comfort. Rudy patted him, but the dog didn't like strangers, and still considered Rudy one. But the boy did not long remain so, for soon he won his way into everyone's heart. "Things are not so bad here in Canton Valais," said his uncle. "We have plenty of chamois. They don't die off as fast as the wild goats. Things are much better now than in the old days, however much we praise the olden times. A hole has been burst in the bag, so now we have a little fresh air in our cramped valley. When you do away with out-of-date things, you always get something better," he said. When the uncle became really talkative, he would tell the boy about his own and his father's childhood. In those days, Valais was, he called it, just a closed bag full of too many sick people, miserable cretins. But the French soldiers came, and they made excellent doctors. They soon killed the disease, and the patients too. They knew how to strike. Yes, to strike in many different ways. Even their girls knew how to strike. Then he winked at his wife, who was French by birth, and laughed. The French knew how to split solid stones if they wanted to. It was they who cut out of solid rock the road over the Simplon Pass. Yes, and made such a road that I could tell a 3-year-old child to go to Italy. You just have to keep on the highway, and there you are. Then the uncle sang a French song and ended by shouting, "Hurrah! For Napoleon Bonaparte." It was the first time Rudy had ever heard of France or of lions, that great city on the Rhone which his uncle had visited. In a few years, Rudy would become an expert chamois hunter, for he showed quite a flair for it, said the uncle. He taught the boy to hold, load, and fire a gun. In the hunting season, he took him up into the hills and made him drink warm chamois blood to ward off hunters' giddiness. He taught him to know the times when, on different slopes of the mountains, avalanches were likely to fall, in the morning or evening, whenever the sun's rays had the greatest effect. He taught him to observe the movements of the chamois and copy their leaps so that he might light firmly on his feet. He told him that if there was no footing in the rock crevices, he must support himself by the pressure of his elbows and the muscles of his thighs and calves. If necessary, even the neck could be used. The chamois is cunning and places sentinels on guard, so the hunter must be still more cunning and scent them out. Sometimes he could cheat them by arranging his hat and coat on his alpine staff, so that the chamois would mistake the dummy for the man. The uncle played this trick one day when he was out hunting with Rudy. It was a narrow mountain path, indeed, scarcely a path at all. It was nothing more than a slight ledge close to the yawning abyss. The snow there was half thawed, and the rock crumbled away under the pressure of a boot, so that Uncle lay down at full length and inched his way forward. Every fragment of rock that crumbled off fell, knocking and bouncing from one side of the wall to the other, until it came to rest in the depths far below. Rudy stood on the edge of the last point of solid rock, about 100 paces behind his uncle, and from there he suddenly saw, wheeling through the air and hovering just above his uncle, an enormous vulture, which, with one stroke of its tremendous wings, could easily have hurled the creeping form into the abyss beneath, and there feed on his carcass. The uncle had eyes for nothing but the chamois, which had appeared with its young kid on the other side of the crevasse. But Rudy kept watching the bird, with his hand on his gun to fire the instant it became necessary, for he understood its intention. Suddenly the chamois leaped upward, the uncle fired, and the animal was hit by the deadly bullet. But the kid escaped as skillfully as if it had had a lifelong experience of danger and flight. The huge bird, frightened by the report, wheeled off in another direction, and the uncle was saved from a danger of which he knew nothing until Rudy told him about it later. As they were making their way homeward in high good humor, the uncle humming an air he remembered from his childhood, they heard a strange noise very close to them. They looked all around, and then upward, and there, on the slope of the mountain, high above, the heavy snow covering was lifted up and heaving as a stretched linen sheet heaves when the wind creeps under it. Then the great mass cracked like a marble slab, broke, and changed into a foaming cataract, rushing down on them with a rumbling noise like distant thunder. An avalanche was coming, not directly toward Rudy and his uncle, but close to them. Much too close. "Hang on, Rudy," he cried. "Hang on with all your might." Rudy threw his arms around the trunk of a nearby tree, while his uncle climbed higher and clung to the branches of the tree. The avalanche roared past a little distance away, but the gale of wind that swept behind it, the tail of a hurricane, snapped trees and bushes all around them as if they had been dry rushes, and hurled them about in wild confusion. Rudy was flung to the ground, for the trunk of his tree looked as if it had been sawed in two, and the upper part was tossed a great distance. And there, among the shattered branches, Rudy found his poor uncle, with a fractured skull. His hands were still warm, but his face was unrecognizable. Rudy turned pale and trembled, for this was the first real shock of his life, the first terror he had ever experienced. Late that evening, he brought the fatal news to his home, which was now to be the home of grief. The wife stood like a statue, uttering no word, shedding no tear. It was not until the corpse was brought home that her sorrow found utterance. The poor Cretan crept into his bed, and was not seen throughout the whole next day. But the following evening, he came to Rudy. "Write a letter for me, please," he said. "Saperli can't write. Saperli can only take letter to post office." "A letter for you?" Rudy asked. "To whom?" "To our Lord Christ." "What do you mean?" And the half-wit, as he was called, looked at Rudy with a touching expression, clasped his hands, and said solemnly and reverently, "Jesus Christ, Saperli would send him a letter to pray him that Saperli lie dead, and not the master of the house here." And Rudy pressed his hand. "That letter wouldn't reach up there. That letter wouldn't restore him to us." He found it very difficult to convince Saperli how impossible his request was. "Now you must be the support of the house," said his aunt. And Rudy became just that. Babette. Who is the best hunter in Canton Valais? The chamois knew well. Beware of Rudy, they might have said to each other, and who is the handsomest hunter? Oh, it's Rudy, the girls said, but they didn't add, beware of Rudy. And their serious mothers didn't say so either, for he bowed as politely to them as to the young girls. He was so brave and happy, his cheeks were so brown, his teeth so white, his dark eyes so sparkling. He was a handsome fellow, just 20 years old. The most icy water never seemed too cold for him to go swimming. In fact, he was like a fish in water. He could outclimb anyone else. He could cling as tightly as a snail to the cliffs. There were steel muscles and sinews in him. That was clear whenever he jumped. He had learned how to leap, first from the cat, and later from the chamois. Rudy was considered the best mountain guide, and he could have made a great deal of money in that vocation. His uncle had also taught him the trade of a cooper, but he had no inclination for that. He was interested in nothing but chamois hunting. That was his greatest pleasure, and it also brought in good money. Everybody said Rudy would be an excellent match, if only he didn't set his sights too high. He was the kind of graceful dancer that the girls dreamed about, and more than one carried him in her thoughts while she was awake. He kissed me while we were dancing. The schoolmaster's daughter, Annette, told her dearest friend, but she shouldn't have told it, even to her dearest friend. Such secrets are seldom kept. They ooze out like sand from a bag that has holes in it. Consequently, however well-behaved and good Rudy was, the rumor soon spread about that he kissed his dancing partners. And yet he had never kissed the one he really wanted to kiss. "Watch him," said an old hunter. "He has kissed Annette. He has begun with A, and he's going to kiss his way through the whole alphabet." A kiss in the dance was all the gossips so far could find to bring against Rudy, but he certainly had kissed Annette, and yet she wasn't the real flower of his heart. Down at Beck's, among the great walnut trees near a small, rushing mountain stream, there lived a rich miller. His home was a large house, 3 stories high, with small turrets. It was made of wood and covered with tin plates, which shone both in sunshine and moonlight. On the highest turret was a weather vane, a shining arrow piercing an apple, an allusion to Wilhelm Tell's famous arrow shot. The mill was prominent and prosperous-looking, and allowed itself to be sketched and written about. But the miller's daughter did not permit herself to be described in painting or writing, at least so Rudy would have said. Yet her image was engraved on his heart. Her eyes sparkled in it so that it was quite on fire. This fire had, like most fires, begun suddenly. The strangest part of it was that the miller's daughter, the lovely Babette, had no suspicion of it, for she and Rudy had never spoken so much as 2 words to each other. The miller was rich, and because of his wealth, Babette was rather high to hope for. But nothing is so high, Rudy told himself, that one may not reach it. You must climb on, and if you have confidence, you won't fall. This was how he had been taught as a child. Now it so happened that Rudy had some business in Beck's. It was quite a journey, for in those days there was no railroad. From the Rhone glaciers, at the very foot of the Simplon, the broad valley of Canton Valais stretches among many and often shifting mountain peaks, with its mighty Rhone River, whose rising waters often overflow its banks, covering fields and roads, destroying everything. Between the towns of Sion and St. Maurice, the valley bends sharply like an elbow, and below St. Maurice it narrows until there is room only for the bed of the river and the narrow carriage road. Canton Valais ends here, and an old tower stands on the side of the mountain like the guardian of the canton, commanding a view across the stone bridge to the custom house on the other side, where Canton Vaud commences. And the closest of the nearby towns is Beck's. Fruitfulness and abundance increase here with every step forward. One enters, so to speak, a grove of chestnut and walnut trees. Here and there, cypresses and pomegranates peep out. It is as warm here as if one were in Italy. Rudy reached Beck's, and after finishing his business, he took a walk about town. But he saw no one belonging to the mill, not even Babette. And that wasn't what he wanted. Evening came on. The air was heavy with the fragrance of the wild thyme and the blossoming lime trees. A shining veil of sky blue seemed to lie over the wooded green hills, and a stillness was everywhere. It was not the stillness of sleep or of death. No, it was as if nature were holding here breath, as of posing, for her image to be photographed on the blue surface of the heavens above. Here and there among the trees in the green field stood poles that carried the telegraph wires through the silent valley. Against one of them there leaned an object, so motionless that it might have been the dead trunk of a tree. It was Rudy, standing there as still as the world around him at that moment. He wasn't sleeping, nor was he dead. But just as great events of the world, or matters of the highest importance to individuals, often are transmitted through the telegraph wires, without those wires betraying them by the slightest movement or the faintest sound, so there passed through Rudy's mind the one mighty, overwhelming thought that now constantly occupied him, the thought of his life's happiness. His eyes were fixed on a single point before him, a light that glimmered through the foliage from the parlor of the miller's house where Babette lived. Rudy stood as still as if he were taking aim at a chamois. But at that moment, he was like the chamois itself, which could stand as if chiseled from rock, and in the next instant, if only a stone rolled past, would spring into life and leave the hunter far behind. And so it was with Rudy, for a thought passed through his mind. "Never give up," he said. "Visit the mill, say good evening to the miller, and good day to Babette. You won't fall unless you're afraid of falling. If I'm going to be Babette's husband, she'll have to see me sooner or later." Then Rudy laughed, and in good spirits, he went to the mill. He knew what he wanted. He wanted Babette. The river with its yellowish-white water was rolling along, overhung with willows and lime trees. Rudy went along the path, and, as the old nursery rhyme says, found to the miller's house his way. But no one was at home except a pussy cat at play. The cat, which was standing on the steps, arched its back and mewed, but Rudy was not inclined to pay my attention to it. He knocked at the door, but no one heard him. No one opened the door. "Meow," said the cat. If Rudy had still been a little boy, he would have understood the cat's language and known that it said, "No one is home." But now he had to go over to the mill to find out. And there he was told that the miller had gone on a long journey to Interlaken. Interlacus, among the lakes, as the highly learned schoolmaster, Annette's father, had explained the name. There was going to be a great shooting match held there, to begin the next morning and last for 8 days. The Swiss from all the German cantons were assembling there, and the miller and Babette had gone too. Poor Rudy, we may well say. It wasn't a lucky time for him to have come to Bex. He could only go home again, which he did, taking the road over St. Maurice and Sion, to his own valley, his own mountains. But he wasn't disheartened. The next morning when the sun rose, he was in good spirits, for they had never been really depressed. "Babette is in Interlaken, a good many days' journey from here," he said to himself. "It's a long way if you follow the highway, but not so far if you cut across the mountain, and that's the best way for a chamois hunter. I've traveled that route before. Over there is my first home, where I lived with my grandfather when I was a little boy, and there are shooting matches at Interlaken. I'll show I'm the best one there, and I'll be with Babette there too, after I've made her acquaintance." With his musket and game bag, and his light knapsack packed with his Sunday best, Rudy went up the mountain. It was the shortest way, though still fairly long. But the shooting matches would only begin that day, and were to last more than a week. During all that time, he had been told, the miller and Babette would be staying with their relatives at Interlaken. So Rudy crossed the Gemmi. He planned to descend near Grindelwald. Happily and in good health, he walked along, enjoying the fresh, pure, invigorating mountain air. The valley sank below him, the horizon widened, showing here one snow-capped summit, there another, until the whole of the bright, shining alpine range was visible. Rudy well knew every snow-covered mountain peak. He was now approaching the Schreckhorn, which pointed its white, powdered stone finger high toward the blue vault above. At last he had crossed the highest mountain ridge. Now the pasture lands sloped down to the valley that was his old home. The air was light, and his thoughts were light. Mountain and valley were blooming with flowers and foliage, and his heart was blooming with the bright dreams of youth. He felt as if old age and death would never approach him. Life, power, and enjoyment would be before him always. Free as a bird, light as a bird, was Rudy. And as the swallows flew past him, they sang as in the days of his childhood, "We and you and we." Everything was light and happy. Down below lay the green velvet meadows, dotted with brown wooden houses, and the river Lutschine murmured and rolled along. He could see the glacier, with its edges like green glass bordering the dirty snow. And looking down into the deep crevasses, he saw both the upper and lower glacier. The pealing of the church bells came to his ears, as if they were welcoming him to his old home. His heart beat faster, and so many old memories filled his mind that for a moment he almost forgot Babette. He was again passing along the same road where, as a little boy, he had stood with the other children to sell the carved wooden toy houses. His grandfather's house still stood over above the pine trees, but strangers lived there now. As in the olden days, the children came running to sell their wares. One of them offered him an alpine rose, and Rudy took it as a good omen, thinking of Babette. Soon he came to the bridge where the two Lutschines unite. Here the foliage was heavier, and the walnut trees gave grateful shade. Then he could make out waving flags, the white cross on the red ground, the standard of Switzerland as of Denmark, and before him lay Interlaken. To Rudy, it certainly seemed like a wonderful town, a Swiss town in its Sunday dress. Unlike other market towns, it was not a heap of heavy stone buildings, stiff, cold, foreign-looking. No, it looked as if the wooden chalets from the hills above had moved down into the green valley below, with its clear stream rushing swiftly as an arrow, and had ranged themselves in rows, somewhat unevenly, to be sure, to form a street. And most beautiful of all, the streets, which had been built since Rudy had last been there as a child, seemed to be made up of all the prettiest wooden houses his grandfather had carved, and that had filled the cupboard at home. They seemed to have transplanted themselves down here and to have grown very much in size, as the old chestnut trees had done. Every house was a so-called hotel, with carved wooden grillwork around the windows and balconies, and with projecting roofs. They were very neat and dainty. Between each house and the wide, hard-surfaced highway was a flower garden. Near these houses, though on only one side of the road, there stood other houses. If they had formed a double row, they would have cut off from view the fresh green meadows where cattle grazed, their bells jingling as in the high alpine pastures. The valley was surrounded by high mountains, with a little break on one side that revealed the glittering, snow-white Jungfrau, in form the most beautiful of all the Swiss mountains. What a multitude of gaily dressed ladies and gentlemen from foreign countries! What crowds of country people from the nearby cantons! The marksmen carried the number of their posts in a garland round their hats. There were shouting and racket and music of all kinds, from singing to hand organs and wind instruments. The houses and bridges were decorated with flags and verses. Banners waved, and shot after shot was being fired. To Rudy's ears, that was the best music. In all this excitement, he almost forgot Babette, though it was for her sake alone that he had gone there. The marksmen were crowding around the targets. Rudy quickly joined them, and he was the best shot of them all, for he always made a bullseye. "Who's that strange fellow, that very young marksman?" people asked. "He speaks the French of Canton Valais, but he can also express himself fluently in our German," said some. "He is supposed to have lived in the valley near Grindelwald when he was a child," someone explained. The lad was full of life, his eyes sparkled, his aim and his arm were steady, so his shots were always perfect. Good luck brings courage, and Rudy always had courage. Soon a whole circle of admirers was around him. They showed him their esteem and honored him. Babette had almost disappeared from his thoughts, but suddenly a heavy hand was laid on his shoulder, and a deep voice spoke to him in French. "You're from Canton Valais?" Rudy turned and saw a fat man with a jolly face. It was the rich miller from Beck's, his broad body hiding the slender, lovely Babette. However, she soon came forward, her dark eyes sparkling brightly. The rich miller was very proud that it was a marksman from his own canton who proved to be the best shot and was so much admired and praised. Rudy was truly the child of good fortune, that which he had traveled so far to find, but had nearly forgotten since his arrival, now sought him out. When in a far land one meets people from his own part of the country, it is easy to make friends, and people speak as if they were well acquainted. Rudy was the foremost at the shooting matches, as the miller was foremost at Beck's, because of his money and his fine mill. So, though they had never met before, the two men shook hands warmly. Babette, too, gave the young man her hand frankly, and he pressed it and gazed at her in such a way that it made her blush. The miller spoke of the long trip they had made, and of the many large towns they had seen. It had been quite a journey, for they had traveled partly by railroad and partly by post. "I came the shorter way," said Rudy. "I came over the mountains. There's no road so high that you can't try it." "But you can also break your neck," said the miller. "And you look as if you probably will break your neck someday. You're so daring." "One never falls so long as one doesn't think of it," said Rudy. The miller's relatives at Interlaken, with whom he and Babette were staying, invited Rudy to visit them, since he came from the same canton as their kinfolk. It was a wonderful invitation for Rudy. Luck was running with him, as it always does with those who are self-reliant, and remember that our Lord gives nuts to us, but he does not crack them for us. And Rudy sat with the miller's relatives, almost like one of the family. They drank a toast in honor of the best marksman. Babette clinked glasses with Rudy too, and he in return thanked them for the toast. In the evening, the whole party walked on the lovely avenue, past the gay-looking hotels under the walnut trees, and there was such a large crowd that Rudy had to give Babette his arm. He explained to her how happy he was to have met people from Canton Vaud, for Vaud and Valais were good neighbors. He expressed himself so cordially about this that Babette could not keep from squeezing his hand. As they walked there, they seemed almost like old friends, and she was such a lively, pretty little person. Rudy was greatly amused at her remarks about the absurd affectations in the dress of some of the foreign ladies and the airs they put on, but she really didn't mean to make fun of them, because there must be some nice people among them. Yes, some sweet and lovely people. She was sure, for her godmother was a very superior English lady. 18 years before, when Babette was christened, that lady had lived in Bex and had given Babette the valuable brooch she was wearing. Her godmother had written her twice, and this year they were to have met her here at Interlaken, where she was bringing her daughters. They were old maids, almost 30, said Babette. She herself was just 18. Her pretty little mouth was not still for an instant, and everything she said appeared to Rudy to be of the greatest importance. And he in turn told her all he had to tell, how he had been to Bex, and how well he knew the mill, and how often he had seen her, though, of course, she had never noticed him. He told her he had been too disappointed for words when he found she and her father were far away. But still, it wasn't far enough to keep him from climbing the wall that made the road so long. Yes, he said all this, and a great deal more, too. He told her how fond he was of her, and how it was for her sake, and not because of the shooting matches, that he had come to Interlaken. Babette became very silent now. All this that he confided to her was almost too much to listen to. As they walked on, the sun set behind the mighty peaks, and the Jungfrau stood in all her glory, encircled by the dark green woods of the surrounding mountains. The big crowd stopped to gaze at it. Even Rudy and Babette enjoyed the magnificent scene. "Nowhere is it more beautiful than it is here," said Babette. "Nowhere," agreed Rudy, with his eyes fixed on Babette. "Tomorrow I must leave," he said a little later. "Come and visit us at Bex," Babette whispered. "My father will be very pleased." A leaf from heaven. High up in the thin, clear air, there flew an angel bearing a flower from the garden of heaven. As he kissed it, a tiny leaf drifted down into the muddy soil in the middle of the wood. It very soon took root there and sprouted and sent up shoots among the other plants. "That's a funny kind of slip," said the plants, and neither the thistle nor the stinging nettle would have anything to do with the stranger. "It must be some low kind of garden plant," they said, grinning and making fun at it. But it grew and grew, and like no other plant, its long branches spread far about. "Where do you think you're going?" said the tall thistles, who have thorns on each of their leaves. "You're taking a good deal of space. That's a lot of nonsense. We can't stand here and support you." When winter came, the snow covered the plant, but from it the blanket of snow received a glow as if the sun were shining from below. Then the spring returned, and the plant was in glorious bloom, more beautiful than any other in the forest. And now there came to the forest a professor of botany, who could show what he was. With many degrees, he carefully inspected the plant and tested it, but decided it was not included in his system of botany. He could not possibly learn to what class it did belong. "This must be some unimportant variety," he said. "I certainly don't know it. It's not included in any system." "Not included in any system," said the thistles and the nettles. The big trees which grew round it heard what was said, and they also saw the tree was not one of their kind, but they said nothing, good or bad. And that is much the wisest course for stupid people to take. Then a poor innocent girl came through the forest. Her heart was pure, and her understanding was glorious with faith. Her only inheritance was an old Bible, but from its pages the voice of God spoke to her. "If people wish to do you evil, remember the story of Joseph. They had evil in their hearts, but God turned it to good. If you suffer wrong, if you are despised and misunderstood, then you must remember the words of him who was purity and goodness itself, and who prayed for those who struck him and nailed him to the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." She stopped before the wondrous plant, whose great leaves gave forth sweet and refreshing fragrance, and whose flowers glowed in the sun like a wonderful firework of color. And from each flower there came a sound, as though it held concealed within itself a deep well of melody that thousands of years would not empty. With devout gratitude, the girl gazed on this exquisite work of the Creator and bent down one of the branches that she might examine the flower and breathe in its sweetness. And a lovely light burned in her soul. It seemed to uplift her heart, and she wanted to pluck a flower, but she had not the heart to break one off, for she knew it would soon fade if she did. So she took only a single green leaf, carried it home, and there she pressed it in between the pages of her Bible, and it lay there quite fresh, always green, and never fading. It was kept in the pages of that Bible, and with that Bible it was placed under the girl's head when, some weeks thereafter, she lay in her coffin. On her gentle face was the solemn peace of death, as if the earthly remains carried the imprint of the truth that she now was in the presence of her Creator. But the marvelous plant still bloomed in the forest. It looked almost like a great tree now, and all the birds of passage, especially the storks and the swallows, bowed down before it. "That thing is taking on foreign airs now," said the thistles and the burdocks. "We never act like that here in this country." And the black forest snails spat at the plant. Then the swineherd came, collecting thistles and other shrubs to burn them for their ashes. He tore up the heavenly plant by the roots and crammed it into his bag. "I can use that too," he said, and no sooner said than done. But for years the king of that country had been troubled by a deep melancholy of spirit. He kept busy and laborious always, but it seemed to do him no good. They read books to him, deep and learned tomes, or the lightest and most trifling they could find, but nothing did any good. Then one of the world's wisest men, to whom they had applied for help, sent a messenger to explain to the king that there was but one sure remedy that would relieve and cure him. In a forest in the king's own country, there grows a plant of heavenly origin. Its appearance cannot be mistaken. And then the messenger brought out a drawing of the plant. It would be easy to recognize it. Its leaves are green winter and summer, so every evening put a fresh leaf on the king's forehead. His thoughts will then clear, and a beautiful dream will refresh and strengthen him. I think I took it up in my bundle and burned it to ashes a long time ago, said the swineherd. I just didn't know any better. You did not know any better, they all said. Ignorance, oh, ignorance, how great you are. And those words the swineherd might well take to heart, for they were meant for him and no one else. Not a single leaf of that plant could be found. No one knew about the one leaf that lay in the coffin of the dead girl. And the king himself, in his terrible depression, wandered out to the spot in the woods. This is where the plant grew, he said. It shall be a sacred place. Then he had it surrounded by a golden railing, and a sentry was posted there, by day and by night. The professor of botany wrote a thesis on the heavenly plant. As a reward, he was gilded all over, and that gilding suited him and his family very well indeed. As a matter of fact, That was the pleasantest part of the whole story, for the plant had disappeared. The king remained as melancholy and sad as before. But then he had always been that way, said the sentry. Moving day. You surely remember old Ole, the watchman of the tower. I have already told you of 2 visits I once paid him when the wind roared about the steeple and the whole city lay glittering below. Yet there was a 3rd visit. No, not the last, for one never truly finishes one's conversations with Ole. They linger in the mind like the echo of the tower bell long after its tone has faded. Usually, my yearly pilgrimage to the tower took place on New Year's Day, when frost glimmered upon the roofs and the air carried the crisp sound of resolutions. But this time, it was moving day. That day when every street in Copenhagen seems to have been overturned by a giant hand and shaken free of all its refuse. The air down there was thick with dust, with broken crockery, with the smell of musty straw dragged from cellars and attics. Windows yawned open, furniture rolled by on creaking carts, and every cobblestone bore the mark of transition. In the midst of this chaos, I noticed 2 children. They had found a heap of discarded straw beside the curb, perhaps from some old bedding, and, with the inventiveness that only the very young possess, they were playing going to bed. They had pulled a tattered scrap of curtain over themselves as a quilt and laughed with delight at their little nest of refuse. "This is wonderful," they cried. Wonderful indeed, I thought, that even in the rubbish of men's dwellings, children can find a dream. But the sight troubled me. It was both comic and sorrowful. I felt an odd weight in my chest, and to relieve it, I climbed the familiar steps to Ole's tower. When I reached him, he greeted me with that calm, measured humor that never left his weathered face. "Ah," said he, "it's moving day. The streets are like one great dustbins with style. But one cartload is enough for me, and I've already chosen mine. You see, I always find something to ponder in the rubbish." He leaned on the railing and looked out across the city's roofs. The air was hazy with smoke, and far below, carts rattled along the cobbles. "Soon after Christmas," Ole continued, "I passed a street like this, raw, damp, and shivering with cold, the sort of day when a cough creeps into one's chest. A rubbish man's cart stood there, piled high with the remains of a season's merrymaking. At the very back was a fir tree, still green, still twinkling faintly with scraps of tinsel. Only a few weeks before, it had stood proud and glittering in some parlor. Now it drooped, crowned not with a star, but with dust. I stopped to look. One might laugh or one might weep at such a sight, perhaps both. And as I gazed, I began to think. Yes, and it seemed to me that the things in that cart were thinking too. Do you know, my friend, that even a worn-out glove has its memories? That glove lay there, its little finger pointing toward the tree, and I fancied it whispered, "That fur touches me. I too have known light and music. My life was one night at a ball, warm with touch and laughter. A single squeeze, and I burst, and so ended my existence." The broken potsherds below it, of course, had their own opinion. They always do. "Tasteless show," they muttered, for broken crockery finds everything tasteless. "We were of use once," they said, "but what is that green stick worth now? A useless ornament." And so they argued in the dust, each from its own point of view, as people do down there on the streets. Yet to me, Ole went on softly, that tree seemed like a bit of poetry fallen into the gutter. The tinsel caught the light of heaven better than many a polished soul does. Yes, there is often a kind of sorrowful beauty hidden in the refuse of moving day. He smiled and turned from the railing. Down below, they are exchanging one set of walls for another. They load their wagons with furniture, and behind every cart rides a house goblin, unseen but faithful, carrying with him all the family's little quarrels and disappointments. What moves is not just the household, but the whole invisible cargo of their lives, the laughter, the grudges, the tears. They believe they begin anew, but they only unpack the same old hearts in a different room. Then Ole's tone grew solemn. "There is another kind of moving day," he said, "one written not in the almanac, but in eternity. The poets have spoken of it in the old verse printed long ago in the newspapers. Remember death's great moving day. Yes, death, too, is an administrator, the most faithful of them all. Have you ever considered his many occupations? He is a bus conductor, collecting fares at the door of eternity. He is the passport clerk, stamping each traveler's paper. He is the manager of life's great savings bank, where every deed, great or small, is deposited. When he comes with his omnibus, we must climb aboard, and he hands us our references, the record of what we have done. That document will either comfort us or sting us, for it is drawn from our own account. No man has escaped that omnibus journey. They say one once tried, the wandering Jew, they call him, and because he could not enter, he must now run forever behind it. Poor soul, what the poets have done to him. But the rest of us, kings and beggars, geniuses and fools, we must all take our seats side by side. No one brings his wealth or title, only the small coin of his deeds. Ole paused and drew in the cool tower air. Imagine the passengers, he said quietly. Here sits the beggar who once warmed himself on a stool in a cold corner, enduring blows and insults. In death's omnibus, that same stool becomes his carriage, shining like gold, blooming like an arbor. For patience has turned his pain into splendor. And there sits another, one who drained the sparkling cup of pleasure and forgot his wrongs in its froth. Death gives him a wooden keg to drink from, a bitter draught of memory. What was once inscribed forgetfulness upon his goblet now reads remembrance. He drinks and sees himself clearly for the first time. That is punishment enough, the worm that never dies, gnawing not the flesh but the conscience. Ole's eyes gleamed in the dimness. Whenever I read history, he said, I cannot help imagining each great figure boarding that bus at last. What did death withdraw from their savings? What single act became their passport to eternity? He leaned closer, lowering his voice. There was once a French king. His name escapes me, though his kindness does not. In a time of famine, he fed his starving people, and in gratitude they raised a monument of snow, writing upon it, "More quickly than this melts did you help us." I believe death gave him one single snowflake, white, eternal, fluttering above his head like a blessing, as his token on the journey. But there was another king, whose name I remember all too well, Louis XI. Wickedness is harder to forget than goodness. You know the story. He executed his chancellor, perhaps with cause, but on the same scaffold, he placed the man's innocent children, that their father's blood might spatter them. He caged those poor boys in the Bastille, bare and shivering, and every 8th day the executioner came to pull a tooth from each child. The elder begged, "Spare my brother, take 2 from me instead." Even the hangman wept, but the king's order was stronger than pity. And so, every 8th day, a silver dish bearing 2 tiny teeth was brought before the throne. When death came for Louis, I think he reached into the savings bank of life and withdrew those same 2 teeth as the king's expense money for eternity. They flew before him like fireflies, bright, burning, accusing. That was his remembrance. Ole fell silent for a long while. The city murmured below us. The bell ropes quivered faintly in the wind. At last he said, "Yes, it is a serious ride, that omnibus on the great moving day. And who knows when our turn will come? Not marked on any calendar, yet it may arrive at any moment. A knock, a whisper, and there stands the conductor with his list. Which of our deeds will he choose for us, I wonder?" He looked out again, and the lamplight from the streets wove golden threads through the mist. "That," said Ole, "is why I keep watch, not only over the city, but over my own heart. For every day brings its small moving day, and every kindness stored may yet pay our fare to eternity. Dance, dance, doll of mine. Yes, this is a song for very small children," declared Aunt Mal, her spectacles glinting as she folded her knitting and looked over them with solemn dignity. "As much as I should like to, I cannot possibly follow this foolish dance, dance, doll of mine. Nonsense verse. It makes no sense at all." But little Amelie could. Indeed, she understood it with her whole tiny heart, for she was only 3 years old, and the world still spoke to her in the language of dolls, dreams, and songs. She played with her dolls every day, and brought them up, as she proudly said, to be as wise as Aunt Mal herself, though perhaps they were wiser, for they listened patiently and never contradicted her. In that same house there lived a young student, a thin, kind-eyed fellow who came each afternoon to help Amelie's brothers with their Latin and arithmetic. He had a soft voice and a curious way of speaking, as though every word carried a secret joke. He would often pause in his lessons, turn toward Amelie and her doll family seated nearby, and say something that made no sense to the grown-ups, but perfect sense to her. Aunt Mala disapproved entirely. "That young man," she would whisper, "has no notion how to speak to children. All that fanciful talk. How can a child's small head possibly grasp it?" But Amelie did grasp it. She listened wide-eyed, her lips parted in delight. She thought he was the most marvelous man in the world, far better company than the dull gentleman who came to drink tea with Aunt Mal on Sundays. One day the student brought a little sheet of paper, folded twice and smelling faintly of ink and violets. "I've written a song," he told her, "for you and your dolls. It's about dancing, because dolls, you know, dance best when no one is looking." He bent down and whispered, "You must promise to teach it to them faithfully." Amelie promised, very solemnly indeed, and that evening she stood before her 3 dolls, the 2 new ones from Christmas, a little lady doll and a gentleman doll, and the oldest of them all, poor Lisa Moer, who had seen better days, and began to sing the song the student had taught her. "Dance, dance, doll of mine. Girl doll's dress is very fine. Boy doll is a dandy, too. He wears gloves and hat and shoe. White pants, blue coat him adorn. On his toe he has a corn. He is fine, and she is fine. Dance, dance, doll of mine. Old doll's name is Lise Moer. She is from the year before. Hair is new. It's made of flax, forehead polished up with wax. Young again, not old and done. Come along, my cherished one. let us dance a fast gavotte. To watch it is worth a lot. Dance, dance, doll of mine. Watch your steps and keep in line. 1 foot forward, watch your feet. Dancing makes you slender, sweet. Bow and twist and turn around. That will make you hale and sound. What a sight it is to see. You are doing fine, all three. When she finished, she clapped her hands in delight, for she was quite sure the dolls had truly heard her. Their glass eyes shone brighter, and their stiff little arms seemed to tremble with secret life. "They understand it," cried Amelie. "They really do." And perhaps they did, for who can say what dolls think when the nursery grows quiet and the moon looks in through the curtains? The student, when he heard her sing it the next day, laughed softly and said, "Splendid. You've given the song a soul. Now the words are alive." But Aunt Mal only shook her head. "A song for babies and fools," she said, setting down her teacup with a sigh. "When one has crossed the fence of youth, such nonsense loses all meaning." "Perhaps," the student replied with a smile. "The fence keeps more things out than it keeps in." Amelie didn't care about fences. She sang the song again that night, and the next, and every day afterward. She sang it to her dolls in sunshine and in candlelight, until even the parlor clock seemed to tick in rhythm with the tune. Sometimes she imagined the dolls whispering together after she fell asleep, repeating the words in their tiny porcelain voices. "Dance, dance, doll of mine." Years later, when Amelie grew tall and her dolls lay silent in a trunk beneath the stairs, Aunt Mal's voice would still echo faintly in her memory. Silly song. But Amelie knew better. She remembered how it had once made her little world sparkle with life, how a kind student had believed that even a toy could dance if a child loved it enough. And so, though the song might have been written for very small children, it carried within it something far greater, a small truth that even Aunt Mal, for all her wisdom, had forgotten. For that is how we know the song at all, because little Amelie, long ago, sang it so earnestly that the tune never died. It drifted from her nursery into ours, soft as a memory, bright as the sound of a child's laughter, and still it whispers, "When the candles burn low, dance, dance, doll of mine." The Stone of the Wise Man. You know the story of Holger Danske, so we won't repeat it, but we'll ask you if you remember how Holger Danske conquered the great land of India, eastward at the end of the world, to the tree called the Tree of the Sun. As Christian Petersen says, do you know Christian Petersen? It makes no difference if you don't. Holger Danske gave Prester John his power and rule over India. Have you heard about Prester John? Yes? Well, it makes no difference if you haven't, because he doesn't come into our story. You are going to hear about the Tree of the Sun. In India, eastward at the end of the world, as people believed it to be then, for they hadn't studied their geography the way we have, but that makes no difference either. The Tree of the Sun was a magnificent tree, such as we have never seen and most likely never will see. Its crown stretched out for miles around. It was really an entire wood, for each of its smallest branches formed in turn a whole tree. Palms, beech pines, plane trees, yes, and many other kinds of trees grew here. Trees that are to be found all over the world. They sprang forth as small branches from the great branches, and these, with their knots and windings, were like hills and valleys, carpeted with soft, velvety green and covered with thousands of flowers. Each branch was like a great blooming meadow or the most beautiful garden. The blessed sun shone down upon it, for remember, it was the tree of the sun. Here the birds from all over the world gathered together, birds from the primeval forests of America, the rose gardens of Damascus, or the wild woods of Africa, where the elephant and the lion imagine that they alone reign. Polar birds came here, and the stork and swallow naturally did too. But the birds were not the only living creatures here. The stag, the squirrel, the antelope, and hundreds of other beautiful and light-footed animals were at home in this place. The crown of the tree was a spreading, fragrant garden, and in the very center of it, where the great branches rose up into a green hill, there stood a castle of crystal with a view toward every country in the world. Each tower rose up in the form of a lily, and one could ascend through the stem. For inside, there were winding stairs. One could step out onto the leaves. These were the balconies. And up in the cup of the flower was a beautiful, brilliant round hall, with no roof above it, only the blue sky, with either the sun or the stars. Down below, in the wide halls of the castle, there was just as much splendor, though of a different sort. Here the whole world was reflected on the walls. One could see everything that happened, so there was no need to read newspapers. There were no newspapers here anyway. Everything could be seen in living pictures, if one wanted to or was able to see it all, for too much is too much, even for the wisest man. And the wisest of all men lived here. His name is too difficult for you to pronounce, and it makes no difference anyway. He knew everything that a man on earth can know or hope to know. He knew every invention that had been made or was yet to be made. But he knew nothing more than that, for everything in the world has its limits. Wise old King Solomon was only half as wise as this man, and yet he was very wise indeed, and governed the forces of nature, and ruled over mighty spirits. Even death itself was forced to report every morning with a list of those who were to die during the day. But King Solomon himself had to die too, and this was the thought that often occupied the mind of the learned, mighty ruler of the castle on the tree of the sun. However high he might rise above men in wisdom, he also must die someday. He knew that he and his children, too, must fade like the leaves of the forest and become dust. He could see the human race fade away like leaves on the trees, and new men come forth to take their places. But the leaves that fell never lived again. They became dust about other plants. What happened to man when the angel of death came to him? What could death be? The body became decayed. And the soul? Yes, what was the soul? What became of it? Where did it go? To the life eternal, the comforting voice of religion said. But what was the transition? Where did one dwell? And how? In heaven above, said the pious people. It is there we go. Above? Repeated the wise man, and gazed up at the moon and stars. Up there? From the earthly globe, he saw that above and below could be one and the same, depending upon where one stood on the revolving earth. And if he ascended as high as the earth's loftiest mountains rear their peaks, there in the air that we below call clear and transparent, the pure heaven would be a black darkness, spread over all like a cloth, and the sun would have a coppery glow without giving forth rays, and our earth would lie wrapped in an orange mist. How narrow were the limits of the mortal eye, and how little could be seen by the eye of the soul. Even the wisest knew little of that which is the most important of all to us. In the most secret chamber of that castle lay Earth's greatest treasure, the Book of Truth. Page after page, the wise man had read it through. Every man may read in this book, but only parts of it. To many and I the letters seem to fade, so that the words cannot even be spelled. On some pages the writing is so pale that they seem like blank leaves. But the wiser a man becomes, the more he can read, and the wisest men read the most. The wise man knew how to unite the sunlight and the starlight with the light of reason and the hidden powers of his soul. And under this dazzling light, many things stood out clearly on the pages before him. But in the chapter of the book entitled Life After Death, there was not so much as one single letter to see. That grieved him. Could he not somewhere on earth obtain a light by which everything written in the book of truth would become clear to him? Like wise King Solomon, he understood the language of the animals and could interpret their talk and their songs. But that made him none the wiser. He had learned the powers of plants and metals, powers that could be used for the cure of diseases or for delaying death, but none that could destroy death. In all created things that he could reach, he sought the light that would shine upon the certainty of eternal life. But he did not find it. Blank leaves still appeared in the book of truth before him. Christianity gave him words of promise of an eternal life in the Bible, but he wanted to read it in his book, and there he could see nothing about it. The wise man had 5 children, 4 sons, educated as well as the sons of the wisest of fathers should be, and a daughter, lovely, gentle, and clever, but blind. Yet this affliction was no deprivation to her, for her father and brothers were mortal eyes to her, and her own keen perception gave her clear mental vision. The sons had never ventured farther from the castle than the extent of the branches of the tree, nor had the sister ever left the home. They were happy children in the home of their childhood, the beautiful, fragrant tree of the sun. Like all children, they were happy to have stories told them, and their father told them many things that other children would never have understood. But these children were as clever as most of our old people are. He explained to them the pictures of life that they saw on the castle walls, the labors of men and the march of events in all the lands of the earth. Often the sons wished that they could go into the world and take part in the great deeds of other men. And then their father explained to them that it was hard and wearisome out in the world, that the world was not as they saw it from their beautiful home. He told them of the good, the true, and the beautiful, and explained that these 3 clung together in the world, and that under the pressure they endured, they hardened into a precious stone, purer than the water of a diamond, a splendid jewel of value to God himself, whose brightness outshone all things. This was called the Stone of the Wise Man. He told them that just as man could gain knowledge of the existence of God by seeking it, so was it within the power of man to gain proof that such a jewel as the Stone of the Wise Man existed. This explanation would have been beyond the understanding of other children, but these children could grasp it, and in time other children too will learn to understand its meaning. They asked their father about the true, the beautiful, and the good, and he told them many things. How, when God made man from the dust of the earth, he gave to his work 5 kisses, fiery kisses, heart kisses, which we now call the 5 senses. Through these, That which is the true, the beautiful, and the good is seen, felt, and understood. Through them, it is valued, protected, and augmented. 5 senses have been given, physically and mentally, inwardly and outwardly, to body and soul. By day and by night, the children thought deeply about all these things. Then the eldest of the brothers had a wonderful dream, and strangely enough, the second brother had the same dream, and the third did too, and the fourth. All of them dreamed exactly the same thing. They dreamed that each went out into the world and found the stone of the wise man, which gleamed like a radiant light on his forehead when, in the morning dawn, he rode his swift horse back over the velvety green meadows of home to the castle of his father. Then the jewel threw such a divine light and brilliance upon the pages of the book that everything written there on the life beyond the grave was illuminated. But the sister dreamed nothing about venturing out into the world, for it had never entered her mind. Her world was her father's castle. "I shall ride out into the wide world," said the eldest brother. "I must find what life is like there, and mix with people. I shall do only what is good and true, and with these I shall protect the beautiful. Many things shall change for the better when I am there." Yes, his thoughts were bold and big, as our thoughts always are at home, before we have gone out into the world and have met with wind and rain, thorns and thistles. Now, in all of these brothers, the 5 senses were highly developed, both inwardly and outwardly, but in each of them, one sense had reached a keenness surpassing the other 4. In the case of the eldest, this outstanding sense was sight. This was to be of special benefit to him. He had eyes for all times, he said, and eyes for all nations, eyes that could look into the very depths of the earth, where treasures lie hidden, or into the depths of people's hearts, as though only a clear pane of glass were before them. In other words, he saw more than we could in the cheek that blushes or turns pale, in the eye that cries or laughs. Stags and antelopes escorted him to the western boundaries of his home, and there the wild swans received him and led him on into the northwest. And now he was far out into the world, far from the land of his father, which extended eastward to the ends of the earth. How widely his eyes opened in amazement! There were many things to be seen here, and things appear very different when a man look at them with his own eyes instead of merely in a picture, as he had done in his father's house. However good the picture may be, and those in his father's house were unusually good. At first he nearly lost his eyes in astonishment at all the rubbish, all the carnival-like decorations that were supposed to represent the beautiful. But he did not quite lose them, and soon found full use for them. He wished to work thoroughly and honestly to understand the beautiful, the true, and the good. But how were these represented in the world? He saw that often the praise, which by right belonged to the beautiful, was given to the ugly, that the good was often overlooked, and mediocrity was applauded when it should have been hissed. People looked at the dress and not at the wearer, asked for a name instead of a value, and were guided more by reputation than by worth. It was the same everywhere. I must attack these things, he thought, and he did so. But while he was seeking the truth, there came the devil, who is the father of all lies. Gladly would he have plucked out the eyes of this seer, but that would have been too blunt, for the devil works in a more cunning way. He let him continue to seek and see the true and the good. But while the young man was doing so, The devil blew a mote into his eye, into both eyes, one mote after another. This, of course, would harm even the clearest sight. Then the fiend blew upon the motes until they became beams, and the eyes were destroyed. There the seer stood like a blind man in the great world and had no faith in it, for he had lost his good opinion of it and of himself. And when a man loses confidence in the world and himself, it is all over with him. All over, sang the wild swans, flying across the sea toward the east. All over, repeated the swallows, also flying eastward toward the tree of the sun. It was not good news that they were carrying to the young man's home. The seer must have done badly, said the second brother, but the hearer may have better luck. For in this sun, the sense of hearing was developed to a very high degree. So keen was it that he could hear the very grass grow. He lovingly bade farewell and rode away from home, full of sound abilities and good intentions. The swallows followed him, and he followed the swans, until he was far from his home, far out in the wide world. Then he discovered that one may have too much of a good things, for his hearing was too fine. Not only could he hear the grass grow, but he could hear every man's heartbeat, whether in sorrow or in joy. To him the whole world was like the great workshop of a clockmaker, with all the clocks going tick-tock, and all the tower clocks striking ding-dong. The noise was unbearable. For a long time his ears held out, but at last all the noise, the shrieking, became too much for one man. Then street boys, of some 60 years of age, for years alone don't make men, raised a tumult at which the hearer would have laughed, except for the slanderous talk that followed and echoed through every house and street. It was heard even in the country lanes. Falsehood pushed itself forward and pretended to be the master. Bells on the fools' caps jangled and insisted they were church bells, until the noise became too much for the hearer, and he thrust his fingers into his ears. But still he could hear false singing and evil sounds, gossip and idle words, scandal and slander, groaning and moaning on all sides. None of it worth listening to. Heaven help us! It was impossible to endure. It was all too mad. He thrust his fingers deeper and deeper into his ears, until at last his eardrums burst. Now he heard nothing at all. He could not hear the true, the beautiful, and the good. His hearing was to have been the bridge by which he would have crossed to it. He became morose and suspicious, at last trusting no one, not even himself, and that was most unfortunate. He would not be able to discover and bring home the divine jewel, and so he gave up. He even gave himself up, and that was the worst of all. The birds that flew eastward brought the tidings of this also to the father's castle in the tree of the sun. No letters arrived there, for there was no mail service. "Now I'll try," said the third brother. "I have a sharp nose." It wasn't a very good practice for him to boast like that, but that was his way, and we must take him as he was. He had a happy disposition and was a poet, a great poet. He could sing many things that he could not speak, and ideas came to him far more quickly than they did to others. "I can smell a rat," he said, and it was his highly developed sense of smell to which he attributed his great range of knowledge about the realm of the beautiful. Every fragrant spot in the realm of the beautiful has its denizens, he said. Some like the smell of apple blossoms, some like the smell of a stable. One man is at home in the atmosphere of the tavern, among the smoking tallow candles. where the smell of spirits mingles with the fumes of cheap tobacco. Another prefers to be near the heavy scent of jessamine, or to scent himself with strong oil of cloves. Some seek the fresh sea breezes, while others climb the highest mountain to look down on the bustling little life beneath. Yes, thus he spoke. It seemed to him as if he had already been out in the wide world and known people from close association with them. But this conviction arose from within himself. It was the poet within him, the gift heaven had bestowed on him in his cradle. He bade farewell to his ancestral home in the Tree of the Sun and went on foot through the pleasant countryside. When he arrived at the boundaries of his home, he mounted an ostrich, which runs faster than a horse, and when he later met the wild swans, he swung himself onto the strongest of them, for he loved variety. Away he flew, across the sea to distant lands of great forests, deep lakes, towering mountains, and proud cities. And wherever he appeared, it seemed as if sunlight traveled with him across the countryside, for every flower and bush gave forth a new fragrance, conscious that nearby was a friend and protector who understood them and knew their value. Then the crippled rosebush stretched out its branches, opened its leaves, and gave bloom to the most beautiful roses. Even the black, slimy wood snail saw its beauty. "I will put my mark on the flower," said the snail. "Now I have spit on it, and there is nothing more I can do for it." "Thus the beautiful always fares in this world," said the poet. Then he sang a song about it in his own way, but nobody listened. So he gave a drummer 2 pennies and peacock's feather, and then arranged the song for the drum, and had it drummed throughout the town, in all the streets and lanes. When the people heard it, they said that they understood it. It was very profound. And so the poet sang other songs about the beautiful, the good, and the true, and people listened to them among the smoking tavern candles, listened in the fresh meadows, in the forests, and on the high seas. It seemed as if this brother was going to have better luck than the other 2. But that angered the devil, and so he promptly set to work with all the incense powder and smoke to be found, the very strongest, which can stifle anyone, and which he can prepare artfully enough to even confuse an angel. And surely, therefore, a poor poet. The devil knows how to take hold of a man like that. He surrounded the poet so completely with incense that the poor man lost his head, forgot his mission, his home, everything, even himself. He then vanished in smoke. When the little birds heard about this, they were sad, and for 3 days they didn't sing. The black wood snail became blacker still, not from grief, but from envy. "They should have burned incense for me," he said, "for it was I who gave him the idea for the most famous of his songs, the drum song about the way of the world. It was I who spat at the rose. I can bring witnesses to prove that." But no news of this reached the poet's home in India, for all the little birds were mourning and silent for 3 days. And when their time of mourning was over, their grief had been so profound that they had forgotten for whom they wept. That's the way it goes. "Now I'll have to go into the world and stay away like the others," said the 4th brother. He had as good a humor as the 3rd, though he was no poet, which was a fine reason for him to have a good humor. Those 2 had filled the castle with gaiety, and now the last of that gaiety was leaving. Men have always considered sight and hearing the 2 most important senses, those that it is most desirable to strengthen and sharpen. The other 3 senses are generally looked upon as subordinate. But that was not the belief of this son, for he had especially cultivated his taste in every way possible, and taste is very powerful indeed. It governs what goes into the mouth and into the mind. Hence, this brother tasted everything there was in pots and pans, in bottles and barrels, explaining that this was the uncouth side of his function. To him, every man was a vessel with something cooking within, and every country was an enormous kitchen, a kitchen of the mind. This he considered fine indeed, and he wanted to go out into the world and taste of it. Perhaps I'll have better luck than my brothers. I shall be on my way, but how shall I travel? Are balloons invented yet? He asked his father, who knew about all inventions that had been made or would be in the future. But men had not yet invented balloons, or steamships, or railways. "Then I'll go by balloon," he said. "My father knows how they're made and steered, and that I can learn. They aren't invented yet, so people will think it's some spirit of the air. When I have finished with the balloon, I'll burn it, and for that you must give me some pieces of another invention to come. Matches." When he had received what he wanted, he flew away. The birds flew much farther along with him than they had with his brothers. They were curious to know how the flight would come out, for they thought it was some new kind of bird. More and more came sweeping up until the air was black with birds. They came on like the cloud of locusts over the land of Egypt. And so now he, the last brother, was out in the wide world. "The east wind is a good friend and helper to me," he said. "You mean the east wind and the west wind," said the winds. "You couldn't have flown northwest if we both hadn't helped you." But he didn't hear what the winds said, and that makes no difference. The birds tired of flying along with the balloon. Too much had been made of that thing, said a pair of them. It had become conceited. "It isn't worth flying with. It's nothing." And then they withdrew. They all withdrew, for indeed too much had been made of nothing. The balloon descended over one of the greatest cities, and the aeronaut landed on the highest point, the church steeple. The balloon rose into the air again, which it shouldn't have done. We don't know where it went, but that doesn't matter, for it was not yet invented. There the young man sat on the church steeple, the birds no longer hovering around him. He had grown as tired of them as they had of him. All the chimneys of the town smoked fragrantly. "Those are altars erected in your honor," said the wind, which thought it ought to say something pleasant. He sat up there boldly and gazed down at the people in the streets. One person was prancing along, proud of his purse. Another was proud of the key that hung at his girdle, though he had nothing for it to unlock. One was proud of his moth-eaten coat, another of his worm-eaten body. "Vanity," he said, "I must go down, dip my fingers into that pot and taste it. But I'll sit here a little longer, for the wind is blowing very pleasantly against my back. I'll take a little rest. It is good to sleep long in the mornings when one has much to do. The lazy man says, 'Laziness is the root of all evil, but there is no evil in our family. I'll stay here as long as the wind blows, for it feels good.' So he sat there. But since he was sitting on the weathercock of the steeple, which turned round and round with him, he had the false idea that the same wind was still blowing. So he remained seated there. He might as well stay a long while and have a good taste. Back in India, in the castle of the Tree of the Sun, it had become empty and quiet. After the brothers, one after another, had gone away. "Things are going badly with them," said the father. Never will they bring home the gleaming jewel. It is not for me. They are all dead and gone." And then he bent over the book of truth and gazed at the page that should have told him of life after death. But there was nothing for him to see or learn from it. Now his blind daughter was his sole joy and consolation. She clung to him with deep affection, and for the sake of his happiness and peace of mind, she wished the precious jewel might be discovered and brought home. With sorrow and longing, she thought of her brothers. Where were they? Where could they be living? With all her heart, she wished she might dream of them. But, strangely enough, not even in her dreams could she reach them. At last, one night, she dreamed that their voices sounded across to her, calling to her from out in the wide world, and she could not hold back, but traveled far, far away. And yet she seemed still to be in her father's house. She never met her brothers, but in her dream she felt a sort of fire burning in her hand that did not pain her. It was the shining jewel she was bringing to her father. When she awoke, she thought for a moment that she still held the stone in her hand, but it was the knob of her distaff that she was grasping. Through that long night, she had spun incessantly, and on the distaff was a thread finer than the finest spider's web. Human eyes could not distinguish the separate threads in it, so fine were they. She had moistened it with her tears, and it was as strong as a rope. She arose. Her decision was made. The dream must become a reality. It was still night, and her father was sleeping. She pressed a kiss on his hand, and then, taking her distaff, fastened the end of the thread to her father's castle. But for this, in her blindness, she would never have been able to find her way home. She must hold fast to that thread and trust neither to herself nor to others. From the tree of the sun, she broke off 4 leaves. These she would entrust to the winds to bring to her brothers as letters of greeting, in case she should not meet them out there in the wide world. How could she fare, that poor blind child? She could hold fast to her invisible thread. She possessed one gift that all the others lacked, sensibility, and by virtue of this, she seemed to have eyes in the very tips of her fingers and ears in her heart. Then she went forth quietly into the noisy, whirling, strange world, and wherever she went, the sky became so bright with sunshine that she could feel the warm rays, and the rainbow spread itself through the blue air where there had been dark clouds. She heard the birds sing and smelled the scent of orange groves and apple orchards so strongly that she seemed to taste the fruit. Soft tones and delightful sounds reached her ears, but with them came howlings and roarings. Manifold thoughts and opinions strangely contradicted each other. The echoes of human thoughts and feelings penetrated into the depths of her heart. One chorus sounded mournfully. "Our earthly life is filled with mist and rain, and in the dark of night we cry with pain." But then she heard a brighter strain. "Our earthly life is like a rose bush, so bright. It is filled with sunshine and true delight. And if one chorus sounded bitterly, each person thinks of himself alone. This truth to us is often shown." From the other side came the answer. "Throughout our life, a fairy of love guides our steps from heaven above." She could hear the words, "There's pettiness here, far and wide. Everything has its wrong side." But then she heard, "So much good is done here that never reaches man's ear." And if sometimes the mocking words sounded to her, "Make fun of everything, laugh in jest, laugh along with all the rest," a stronger voice came from the blind girl's heart. trust in God and thyself. Pray then his will be done forever. Amen. Whenever the blind girl entered the circle of humanity and appeared among people, young or old, knowledge of the true, the good, and the beautiful was radiant in their hearts. Wherever she went, whether she entered the studio of the artist, or the hall decorated for the feast, or the crowded factory with its whirring wheels, it seemed as though a sunbeam were entering, as though the string of a lute sounded, or a flower exhaled its perfume, or a refreshing dewdrop fell upon a withering leaf. But the devil could not put up with this. With more cunning than that of 10,000 men, he devised a way to bring about his purpose. From the marsh, he collected little bubbles of stagnant water and muttered over them a sevenfold echo of untrue words to give them strength. Then he blended bought heroic poems and lying epitaphs, as many as he could find, boiled them in the tears of envy, colored them with grease paint he had scraped from the faded cheeks of an old lady, and from all this he fashioned a maiden, with the appearance and carriage of the blind girl, the blessed angel of sensibility. Then the devil's plot was consummated, for the world knew not which of the two was the true one, and indeed how could the world know? Trust in God and thyself, pray then his will be done forever. Amen, sang the blind girl in complete faith. Then she entrusted to the winds the 4 green leaves from the tree of the sun as letters of greeting to her brothers, and she was quite sure that they would reach their destinations and the jewel be found, the jewel that dims all the glories of the world. From the forehead of humanity it would gleam even to the house of her father. Even to the house of my father, she repeated. Yes, the place of the jewel is on this earth, and I shall bring with me more than the promise of it. I can feel its glow. In my closed hand it swells larger and larger. Every grain of truth, however fine it was, which the wind whirled toward me, I caught up and treasured. I let penetrate into it the fragrance of the beautiful, of which there is so much in the world, even for the blind. To the first I added the sound of the beating heart, doing good. I bring only dust with me, but still it is the dust of the jewel we sought, and it is in ample quantity. I have my whole hand full of it. Then she stretched forth her hand toward her father. She was home. She had traveled there with the swiftness of thoughts in flight, having never let go of the invisible thread leading to home. With the fury of a hurricane, the evil powers swept over the tree of the sun, and their wind blasts rushed through the open doorway into the sanctuary of the book of truth. It will be blown away by the wind, cried the father, and he seized the hand she had opened. Never, she replied with calm assurance. It cannot be blown away. I can feel the rays warming my very soul. And the father became aware of a dazzling flame, right where the shining dust poured from her hand onto the book of truth, that would grant the certainty of an everlasting life. Now, on the white page, there glowed one shining word, one word only: believe. And once more the 4 brothers were with their father and sister. When the green leaf had fallen upon the bosom of each, a great longing for home had taken hold of them and led them back. The birds of passage had followed them, as had the stag, the antelope, and all the wild creatures of the forest, for all wished to share in their joys. And why shouldn't they when they could? We have often seen how a column of dust whirls around where a sunbeam bursts through a crack in a door into a dusty room. But this was not common, insignificant dust. Even the colors of the rainbow are lifeless compared with the beauty that showed itself here. From the page of the book, from the glowing word believe, arose each grain of truth, decked with the loveliness of the beautiful and the good, flaming more brightly than the mighty pillar of fire that led Moses and the children of Israel to the land of Canaan. And from the word believe arose the bridge of hope, extending to the eternal love in the realm of the infinite. The tallow candle, it sizzled and hissed softly, as if whispering the first lullaby of creation. The cauldron trembled over the dancing fire, and from the molten cradle of heat and tallow was born something pure and slender. A candle, white as morning snow, smooth as polished ivory. Its shape was delicate, its form elegant, and those who beheld it could not help but feel that here was a promise made flesh, a promise of brightness, of warmth, of light that would one day shine forth for the good of all who wandered in darkness. The sheep had given it its body, soft, white, and clean, like the fleece on a winter hillside. From the melting pot it had received its spirit, a yearning for the flame, an unspoken destiny that one day fire would run through its marrow and bone and make it truly alive. Thus it entered the world with the best of hopes, a heart full of faith and a dream of radiance. It believed its life would be a hymn of light, that every flicker it gave would mean something good, something kind. In the beginning, the world smiled upon it. Everywhere it looked, there were wonders, mirrors that caught its gleam, polished spoons that winked in return, brass pots that admired its slim reflection. "You will glow in grand halls," they said. "You were born for the company of chandeliers, not for dusty corners." The candle listened, and in its waxen chest it felt pride begin to stir. Innocent, gentle pride. It wanted to do right, to shine purely, to be of use. But the world that had flattered it soon forgot its own words. It saw the candle not as a being of purpose, but as a tool for convenience. Rough hands seized it, smudged its whiteness, and left sooty fingerprints upon its sides. The candle, too trusting, did not resist. It thought, "If I give them light, they will care for me in return." But no such care came. Its brightness dimmed, its once pristine skin grew gray and spotted. Those who touched it did not see its inner glow, only a surface they could use and discard. As time passed, the candle began to understand sorrow. The pure wax that once promised eternity was now covered with grime. The beautiful promise seemed lost. Those who might have appreciated its light now turned away, fearful of the dirt that clung to it. And those who had used it before no longer found it bright enough for their needs. "It has lost its shine," they said. "It is good for nothing." So they cast it aside. The candle lay forgotten on a shelf in a cold room, surrounded by dust and cobwebs. It remembered its birth, its bright beginnings, and wondered if they had been only a dream. "Was I created only to be spoiled?" it asked the silence. "Why do I exist if not to shine? And if I was meant to shine, why does no one see the light still living inside me?" The questions melted in its heart like slow tears. It thought long and hard, perhaps too long. For the more it thought, the darker its world seemed to grow. It felt as though the grime outside had crept inward, veiling its own soul. Days passed like empty shadows. The candle had almost given up believing in itself when one evening the door creaked open and a faint spark entered the room. A little tinderbox, worn and humble, but carrying within it a secret fire. The tinderbox noticed the candle at once. It did not mock its dirt or turn away from its scars. Instead, it saw through them, straight into the still, pure core within. "Ah," whispered the tinderbox, "you are not ruined. You are only waiting to be awakened." The candle trembled, half in fear, half in hope. "Do you truly see me?" it asked softly. "I see what lies beneath," replied the tinderbox. "I see the good you have kept safe all this time." And so, with gentle care, it touched its spark to the candle's wick. A breath of light leapt forth, at first timid, then confident, then joyous. The candle's heart melted in gratitude, and its flame rose tall and golden, like a torch at a wedding feast. Warmth filled the forgotten room, chasing away the cobwebs and the gloom. The candle glowed with such brilliance that every dark corner seemed to blush with life again. It saw its reflection shining in the windows and felt, for the first time, complete. Droplets of wax rolled slowly down its sides, smooth and round like pearls. They were not tears of sorrow, but seeds of new creation, tiny offerings that covered the old stains, layer by layer, until nothing of the grime remained visible. Each drop was both flesh and spirit, born of the union between the candle and the flame, a living symbol of purpose fulfilled. Now others came, drawn by the gentle light. Moths fluttered in wonder, shadows danced along the walls. "Look," they murmured, "it shines again." And indeed it did, brightly, kindly, steadily. The candle had found its rightful place, to bring warmth to the cold, to bring sight to the lost, to remind every onlooker that purity can live beneath even the thickest layer of soot. It understood now that the world's rejection had been part of its making. Without darkness, its light would have had no meaning. Without pain, it would never have known compassion. It had been a candle all along, only waiting for the right flame to awaken its soul. From that day forward, the tallow candle burned with serene pride. It no longer feared the melting of its body, for it knew that every drop given was a gift returned to life itself. Night after night it shone, sometimes in lonely corners, sometimes beside joyful company, but always with the same steady heart. And when at last its flame grew small and the final spark drifted upward like a sigh, it left behind no bitterness, only a soft fragrance and the memory of light. For the candle had lived truly. It had burned, it had given, it had loved. And in that giving, it had found eternity.